I stepped onto the trail just as the morning sun broke through the trees. It had rained the night before, and the ground was soft, my boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. The air smelled of wet leaves and pine, clean and sharp. I adjusted the straps on my pack, making sure everything sat comfortably. This was supposed to be a simple solo hike, a day in the woods, away from the noise of life. The trail was well worn, cutting through the forest in a winding path. Birds chirped, and I could hear the distant rush of a creek somewhere off to my right. Everything felt peaceful. I walked at a steady pace, enjoying the solitude. I had hiked this trail before, but never alone. There was something different about being out here by myself. It made me more aware of the sounds, of the way the trees swayed, of the crunch of twigs beneath my boots. About an hour in, I came to a split in the trail. The left path was the main route, well-traveled, leading up to a small overlook. The right path was narrower, less maintained, and I had never taken it before. It looked like it had been used recently, faint footprints in the mud, the undergrowth slightly pushed back. I don't know why, but I chose the right path. It wasn't long before I realized this trail was different. It felt older, more isolated. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. The birds had stopped singing, and the only sound was my breathing and the occasional rustling of branches. The trees here were taller, their thick trunks blocking most of the sunlight. The air felt colder. I checked my map, but this trail wasn't marked. That was strange, but I wasn't too worried yet. I had a good sense of direction, and as long as I kept track of my bearings, I could turn back if needed. I kept going, stepping carefully over roots and rocks, moving deeper into the woods. About 2 hours in, I started to feel uneasy. There was no specific reason, just an unsettling sensation, like I was being watched. I stopped and listened. Nothing, just silence. The wind had picked up slightly, making the trees creak. I shook off the feeling and kept going. Then I noticed something odd. The footprints I had seen earlier, the ones that made me think someone had been here before me, they were gone. The trail was undisturbed, like no one had walked it in years. That didn't make sense. I could have sworn I had seen them earlier. I looked behind me. My own footprints were there, but the ones I had seen ahead were missing. I kept moving, but I was more alert now. Every sound made me stop. Every shift in the trees made me turn my head. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid or if something was really off. I reached into my pack and pulled out my knife, holding it loosely in my right hand, just in case. After another mile, I found something that made my stomach drop. A torn backpack, half buried under leaves and dirt. It was old, faded, worn. I crouched down and brushed the leaves away. The zippers were broken. There was nothing inside. No ID, no supplies, nothing. It had been here for a while. I looked around, scanning the forest for any sign of the owner. Nothing. I stood up quickly, suddenly feeling exposed. The silence pressed against my ears. I needed to turn back. I had gone far enough. I marked the spot on my map and started walking back the way I came. But something was wrong. The trail looked different. The trees looked unfamiliar, the path twisting in ways I didn't remember. I told myself to stay calm. I had only taken one path in. There was no way I had gone off course. I followed my footprints back, my eyes scanning for any familiar markers. Then my footprints disappeared. The mud where I had walked before was undisturbed. No prints, no sign that I had come this way at all. My breathing picked up, my pulse pounding in my ears. I turned in a slow circle, trying to make sense of it. I wasn't lost. I couldn't be. I had been careful. I had watched where I was going. I checked my compass. The needle spun wildly before settling in the wrong direction. That didn't make sense either. I tapped it, shook it. Same result. I was disoriented, my mind racing. Then I saw movement, a shift in the trees, just beyond my vision. Something large, staying just out of sight. I gripped my knife tighter. I wasn't alone. I forced myself to move, picking up the pace, trying to follow any trail that looked familiar. My breath was heavy, my legs burning. Every time I thought I was getting back to where I had started, the forest changed. The path twisted again, leading me in circles. My map was useless now. My compass wouldn't work. Then I heard it. A low sound like breathing. Not mine. Something else. It was close. Too close. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just ran. Branches whipped against my arms. My feet stumbling over roots and rocks. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they would give out. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the trees thinned, and I burst onto the main trail. I fell to my knees, gasping. The sun was lower now, shadows stretching across the ground. I looked behind me. The path I had come from was gone. There was nothing but thick trees and undergrowth, no sign of the trail I had been on. I didn't wait to figure it out. I forced myself to stand, to move, to get back to my car. I walked as fast as I could without running, my whole body tense. I didn't look back again. When I reached the parking lot, the relief was overwhelming. I locked myself in my car and just sat there, shaking. I checked my phone, no signal. The sun was almost down now. I started the engine and drove away, not stopping until I was miles down the road. I don't know what happened in those woods. I don't know why the trail vanished, why my footprints disappeared, why my compass failed. I don't know what I heard or what I saw moving between the trees. But I know one thing for sure. I'll never hike alone again. I took the trail alone that morning. It wasn't the smartest decision, but I had done it before. The woods were familiar to me, and I always carried the basics: water, a knife, and a GPS. I planned a short, 6-mile loop through a remote section of the forest, expecting to be back before noon. The first few miles were peaceful. The sun filtered through the trees, birds called out from the branches, and my boots crunched softly against the dirt. I kept a steady pace, following the winding path as it curved deeper into the forest. An hour in, the trail narrowed. It wasn't uncommon for less traveled paths to be overgrown, so I pushed through, stepping over fallen branches and ducking under low-hanging limbs. My GPS showed I was still on course, but something about the area felt off. It was too quiet. The birds had stopped, and the wind barely rustled the leaves. I shrugged it off and kept moving. The map showed a small creek ahead, a good place to rest before heading back. But when I reached it, something was wrong. The water was murky, darker than it should have been. A strange, metallic smell hung in the air. I knelt to touch the water and immediately pulled back. It was unnaturally cold. Not just cool, but freezing, like it had come straight from ice. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine. Someone had been here recently, but the prints didn't make sense. They led straight into the water, but there were none coming out. The creek wasn't deep, maybe ankle-high at most. Whoever walked in should have left prints on the other side. A cold unease settled in my stomach. I scanned the area, but the trees were thick, and the undergrowth made it impossible to see far. I listened, but aside from the occasional drip of water, there was nothing. No animals, no wind, just silence. I should have turned back then, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the person had stepped carefully on the rocks and not left a trail. Maybe they had walked through the water upstream. I didn't know, but I didn't want to let my imagination get the best of me. I pressed on. The trail climbed uphill, winding through dense forest. The trees seemed taller here, their trunks stretching high and blocking out most of the light. The ground was damp, and my boots sank slightly with each step. Then I smelled it, something rotting. I've come across dead animals before. It's not uncommon in the woods, but this was worse, stronger, clung to the air, thick and sour. I covered my nose with my sleeve and kept walking, hoping to pass it quickly. I didn't. The smell only got stronger. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a pile of leaves, but as I got closer, I saw the shape of a deer. It was lying on its side, legs twisted unnaturally. Its stomach had been torn open, the flesh ragged and dark. I've seen predator kills before, but this wasn't clean. It was brutal. I stepped back. The woods felt even quieter now. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees, searching for movement. My gut told me I wasn't alone. I moved faster after that. The trail looped around and should have connected back to the main path soon. I kept my eyes on my GPS, making sure I was on track. Every few steps, I glanced back, my skin crawling with the sense of being watched. Then I heard it, a snap. Not the distant kind, not a branch falling naturally. This was close, deliberate. I turned sharply, my heart hammering. Nothing. I picked up my pace. My breath was heavy, my pulse loud in my ears. The trail should have reconnected by now. I checked my GPS again, and my stomach dropped. I wasn't on the trail anymore. I had been following what looked like a path, but my GPS showed I was off course. Somehow, I had veered in the wrong direction. I forced myself to stay calm. I could backtrack, find where I went wrong. I turned around, but the woods didn't look the same. The trees all blended together. I tried retracing my steps, but after 5 minutes, nothing looked familiar. Then I saw something ahead, a structure. It wasn't a cabin, not a proper one, just a crude shelter made of branches and leaves. It looked abandoned, but something about it made my skin crawl. I didn't go near it. I turned and walked the other way, forcing my legs to move quickly, trying to keep my breathing steady. Another snap. I broke into a run. I didn't care about direction anymore. I just wanted out. The trees blurred past me, branches scratching at my arms. My GPS bounced against my chest as I ran, and I barely heard it over the pounding in my ears. Then, suddenly, I burst onto the trail. Relief flooded through me. The familiar dirt path stretched ahead, leading back the way I came. I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned, only slowing when I was sure I had put distance between myself and whatever had been out there. I made it back to my car, hands shaking as I unlocked the door. I threw my pack inside and sat there for a long moment, catching my breath, listening. The woods were still silent. I don't know what I saw that day. I don't know who made those footprints or what killed that deer. But I do know one thing. I won't hike alone again. Not out there. I parked my car at the trailhead just after sunrise. The lot was empty, which I expected on a weekday. Most people didn't have the luxury of taking off work to go hiking alone. But I needed this. A break from the city, from people, from everything. Just me, the trees, and the silence. The trail was about 8 miles long, a loop that wound through dense forest before climbing up a ridge. I had done my research. It wasn't a technical hike, but it was isolated. The park's website warned hikers to bring extra supplies in case of emergencies, as help could take hours to arrive. That was fine by me. I had packed plenty of water, a first aid kit, and a knife just in case. The air was crisp, the kind that feels clean when you breathe it in. The dirt path beneath my boots was damp from the night's rain, making the scent of earth and leaves even stronger. It was perfect. For the first couple of miles, I moved easily. The trees were thick, towering overhead, their branches tangled in a way that blocked most of the sky. The occasional bird call broke the quiet, but otherwise, it was just me and my footsteps. Then, around mile 3, I saw something strange. It was just off the path. Something small and dark, half buried in the dirt. I walked closer and crouched down, brushing the leaves aside. A shoe. A single hiking boot, covered in mud, the laces frayed. It looked old, like it had been there for months. I stood up and scanned the woods. Nothing, just trees and undergrowth. Could have been nothing. Maybe someone lost it, or maybe an animal dragged it here. Still, I felt uneasy. I didn't like finding something that looked like it had been abandoned. I kept moving, my pace a little faster. The ridge wasn't far, and I told myself I was being paranoid. Just an old shoe, nothing more. The climb up the ridge was tougher than I expected. The trail steepened, and the wet ground made footing tricky. By the time I reached the top, my legs burned, and I was sweating despite the cool air. I took a break, drinking some water and looking out over the valley below. The view was incredible, rolling hills, a dense blanket of trees stretching for miles. But something about the stillness made me uneasy. I felt exposed, like I was being watched. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. I wasn't used to being so alone. Then I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, but once I noticed it, I couldn't ignore it. A thick, rotten stench, like meat left out in the sun too long. It was coming from the trees ahead, where the trail started to descend. I hesitated. The logical part of my brain told me it was just a dead animal. It happened all the time in the wild. Something died and nature took its course. But the smell was strong, too strong. I moved forward, slowly, my stomach tight. The stench grew worse, and then I saw it. A deer carcass torn apart. Its ribs jutted out, the flesh stripped away in ragged chunks. Flies swarmed over the remains, the buzzing loud in the silence. But that wasn't what made my breath catch. It was the way the body was positioned, splayed out in the center of the trail, as if placed there on purpose. I stared at it, my skin crawling. Something wasn't right. Animals killed for food, but this wasn't a natural kill. The cuts were too clean in some places, too precise, like they'd been made with a blade. A deep unease settled in my gut. I needed to get out of here. I turned and started back the way I came. I hadn't planned on backtracking, but I wasn't about to keep going forward, deeper into whatever the hell this was. I walked fast, my boots crunching against the damp earth. Every sound felt too loud. The rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, my own breathing. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me, somewhere in the trees. I froze. The sound stopped. I turned, scanning the woods. Nothing. Just shadows between the trees. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just my nerves playing tricks on me. But my gut said otherwise. I picked up the pace, walking fast, then faster until I was nearly jogging. My heart pounded, the feeling of being watched stronger than ever. Then the sound came again. Footsteps, moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped. Someone was there. I broke into a full run. The trail blurred beneath me, my breath coming in sharp gasps. My only thought was getting back to my car, getting out. A branch scraped my arm, but I barely felt it. I just ran, ignoring everything else, pushing forward as fast as I could. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound was gone. I didn't stop running, not until I saw my car through the trees. I practically threw myself inside, slamming the door and locking it. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I didn't look back as I pulled onto the road. I drove straight home, my mind racing the entire time. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of the deer carcass, the footsteps, the feeling of being watched, it all replayed in my head. The next morning, I checked the park's website. There was nothing about any missing hikers, no reports of anything unusual. But I knew what I felt. Someone had been there, and they didn't want me to leave. I always liked hiking alone. Not in a careless way, but in a way that made me feel in control. No waiting for someone to catch up. No one whining about being tired. No distractions. Just me, the trees, and the rhythm of my boots hitting the dirt. That's why, when I planned a solo trip to a remote section of the national forest, I felt more excited than anything else. It wasn't a well-known trail, just something I had found on a forum. The kind of place that only serious hikers talked about. I got there early in the morning, parked my truck at the base of the trail, and set out. The first few miles were uneventful, just the usual bird calls and the rustling of small animals in the brush. The trail was narrow and steep in places, winding through thick trees and sharp rock formations. About 6 miles in, I noticed something strange. The forest felt off. It wasn't anything obvious. No weird sounds, no eerie silence, just something I couldn't put my finger on. The trees seemed denser than they should have been, the air heavier. I pushed the feeling aside and kept going. At mile 8, I came across an old, rusted-out car deep in the woods. It was just sitting there, half buried in leaves. No road nearby, no trail leading to it. It must have been there for decades. The windows were shattered, the tires long gone. I peered inside and saw nothing but dirt and debris. Still, it unsettled me. Someone had driven it out here once, and for some reason they had never left with it. I moved on, but the uneasy feeling stuck with me. The forest seemed quieter now. Even my footsteps sounded different, duller. It was like the trees were swallowing the sound. Around mile 10, I decided to set up camp. I found a small clearing near a slow-moving creek and pitched my tent. It was a good spot. Flat ground, close to water, and just enough space for a fire. As the sun dipped below the trees, I ate a quick meal and stretched out in my tent. I should have fallen asleep easily, but something kept me awake. Maybe it was just nerves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I forced myself to ignore it, zipped my sleeping bag up tight, and closed my eyes. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a noise. A single snap of a branch, sharp and close. My eyes shot open. I listened, barely breathing. Nothing. The forest was still. Too still. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on. The weak beam barely cut through the darkness outside the tent. I waited, straining my ears. Just as I was about to lie back down, I heard it again. A slow, deliberate crunch of leaves. Not an animal too heavy, too steady. I sat up, heart hammering. My first instinct was to yell out, but something stopped me. I didn't want whoever or whatever was out there to know exactly where I was. The sound came again, closer this time. A long pause, then another step. My hands tightened around my flashlight. I had a knife in my pack, but I didn't dare move to get it. Then silence. A long, suffocating silence. I stayed like that for what felt like an hour, every muscle locked, barely breathing. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I must have dozed off because I woke up to the soft light of morning filtering through the tent. The first thing I did was check around my campsite. Nothing was disturbed. No footprints. No broken branches. If something or someone had been there, they had left no trace. I packed up quickly, deciding to cut my trip short. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to stick around to find out. The hike back felt longer. The uneasy feeling hadn't left, and every rustling leaf made my skin crawl. About 2 miles from my truck, I found something that stopped me cold. It was a boot print, fresh, deep, and not mine. Someone else had been on this trail, but that wasn't what made my stomach drop. It was facing the wrong way. Whoever had made it wasn't hiking in. They had been following me out. I forced myself to keep moving, keeping my pace steady even though my pulse was racing. When I finally saw my truck through the trees, I nearly sprinted the last 100 feet. I threw my gear in the back, jumped in, and locked the doors. As I pulled out onto the dirt road, I glanced back at the trailhead. The forest stood still, silent, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Someone had been out there with me, and they had never wanted me to leave. I had always loved hiking alone. It was something about the quiet, the steady rhythm of my steps, the wind moving through the trees, cleared my mind in a way nothing else could. I had done plenty of solo hikes, even overnight trips, and I knew how to handle myself in the wilderness. I wasn't reckless, I wasn't inexperienced. But no matter how much you prepare, how well you think you know the land, things can still go wrong. And when they do, they go wrong fast. The trail I had chosen wasn't particularly dangerous. It was a long loop, about 12 miles total, winding through a thick forest before climbing up to a ridge with a wide view of the valley below. I'd hiked it once before, years ago, but I barely remembered it. I started early, the morning light stretching long shadows over the dirt path. It was supposed to be an easy day, out by sunrise, back before dusk. The first few miles were peaceful. Birds called through the trees. The air smelled fresh, earthy. The trail was narrow but well-worn, marked every so often with faded wooden signs. I took my time, stopping to drink water, snapping a few pictures of the scenery. I wasn't in a rush. I had all day. Around the 4-mile mark, the path began to climb. The trees thinned, and the sun hit harder. I could feel sweat gathering under my pack straps. I pushed on, keeping a steady pace, breathing through the burn in my legs. Eventually, I reached the ridge. The view was worth it. The valley stretched out below me, wide and open, the river cutting through it like a silver vein. I took a long drink from my water bottle and sat down on a flat rock to rest. That's when I noticed it. A faint sound, almost too quiet to hear over the wind. A rustling, further down the ridge, just out of sight. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer moving through the brush. I stayed still, listening. The rustling came again, but this time it was followed by something else. A soft, deliberate crunch of gravel. Footsteps. I turned, scanning the ridge. Nothing. Just trees, rocks, the trail winding down the other side. My heart was beating faster now, but I told myself to relax. It was probably another hiker. Maybe I just hadn't seen them yet. I waited, expecting someone to come around the bend. No one did. I stood up, slinging my pack over one shoulder. I had no reason to be nervous. It was a public trail, and I wasn't the only person out here. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started walking again, heading down the far side of the ridge, keeping my pace steady. I listened, but the only sound was the crunch of my own footsteps. About a mile later, the trail dipped back into the trees. The air grew cooler, the light dimmer. I kept walking, but the unease stayed with me. Every so often, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone behind me. But the trail was empty. Then I saw it. A footprint, right in the middle of the trail, fresh in the dirt. It wasn't mine. It was slightly larger, the tread pattern different. Someone else had come this way recently. That wasn't unusual, but something about it made my skin crawl. The print wasn't facing forward like mine. It was facing the other way, like whoever left it had been walking in the opposite direction. But I hadn't seen anyone pass me. I kept moving faster now. My legs were tired, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be back at my car. I checked my watch. If I kept a good pace, I could be back before dark. A few minutes later, I heard it again. The rustling, closer this time. I stopped, heart hammering. The trees were thick here, the undergrowth dense. I scanned the woods, straining my ears. Silence. Then another sound. Not footsteps. Breathing. Slow, deliberate, not my own. Just off the trail, somewhere in the trees. I turned, walking faster now. Not running. Not yet. But my body was tense, my instincts screaming. Something wasn't right. I tried to push it down, to stay rational. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe a branch snapped behind me. I ran. I don't remember making the decision. My body just moved. My pack slammed against my back, my boots pounding against the dirt. I didn't look back. Couldn't. I just ran. The trees a blur around me. The trail twisted, dipped, climbed. My lungs burned. My legs ached. But I didn't stop. I don't know how long I ran before I finally dared to glance over my shoulder. Nothing. Just trees, the empty trail. No movement, no shadow slipping between the trunks. No sound except my own ragged breathing. I slowed to a walk, chest heaving. My whole body was trembling. I felt stupid now, embarrassed. There was nothing there, just paranoia, just my mind playing tricks on me. I forced myself to take a deep breath to keep walking. The rest of the hike was a blur. I kept my pace fast, glancing back every few minutes. I didn't hear anything else. I didn't see anything. The feeling of being watched never fully went away, but I told myself it was all in my head. When I finally reached the parking lot, my car was the only one there. I threw my pack into the back seat and locked the doors the second I got inside. My hands were still shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. As I pulled out, I glanced at the entrance to the trailhead. The wooden sign, the dirt path winding into the trees. I felt a sudden, intense relief that I was leaving it behind. Then I saw it. Something small, half buried in the dirt by the entrance. My stomach turned to ice. It was a footprint, fresh, facing the trail, like someone had been standing there, watching, waiting. I left early in the morning before the sun was up, the air still damp from the night. The hike was something I had planned for months. A solo trip deep into the mountains, miles away from any town or road. I wanted the silence, the kind that you could only find where there were no people, no cars, nothing but the wind through the trees and the sound of your own footsteps. I had packed everything carefully. Extra layers, food, water, a knife, a first aid kit. My phone had no service the second I turned onto the dirt road leading to the trailhead, but I had a map and a compass. I had done this before. I wasn't worried. The first few miles were peaceful. The trail wound through thick pines, their trunks tall and straight. Birds flitted between the branches. I moved steadily, breathing in the cool air. The path was well marked and I made good time. Around midday, I reached a clearing where the trees gave way to a steep incline. I took a break, drinking water and eating a granola bar, listening to the stillness. It was so quiet that my own chewing felt loud. I checked the map. The next stretch of the hike would take me up and over the ridge ahead, then down into a valley where I planned to camp for the night. I started climbing, the incline making my legs burn. The higher I went, the thinner the trees became. The wind picked up, rustling through the dry grass. The silence felt different here, not peaceful, but empty. I told myself it was just the altitude making me feel uneasy. I crested the ridge by late afternoon. Below me, the valley stretched out, the trees thick again at the bottom. There was no sign of people, no distant sound of an airplane or a car, just the wind. I started the descent. The trail was less defined here, narrower, with loose dirt that made me slide a few times. The trees here were different, older, thicker, their branches twisted. The air smelled damp, like earth and decay. I walked carefully, feeling the quiet press in on me. The sun was getting lower, the shadows stretching long across the trail. I reached the bottom as the light started to fade. I found a flat spot near a small stream and set up my tent, gathering some dry wood for a small fire. The flames flickered weakly in the cool air. I ate quickly, suddenly aware of how alone I was. The silence felt heavier now. The sounds of the forest had changed. No birds, no rustling, just stillness. I told myself I was imagining things, that I had spent too much time in my own head. I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut. My sleeping bag was warm, my body tired from the long hike. I closed my eyes, listening to the sound of my own breathing. I must have dozed off because I woke up sometime later, heart pounding. Something had woken me. I listened, straining my ears. The fire outside had burned down to embers. The stream still trickled nearby. Then something moved, a soft, deliberate crunch of leaves. Close. I held my breath. My mind raced through possibilities. A deer, a bear, something harmless. I reached for my knife, gripping it tight. Another crunch. Closer. I sat up slowly, trying not to make a sound. The tent fabric felt thin, too thin. My brain screamed at me to unzip it, to look, to see what was there. But another part of me, the part that felt the weight of the silence, told me not to move. Then a long, slow exhale, right outside the tent. Human. I froze. My stomach twisted. Every hair on my body stood on end. I stayed perfectly still. Whoever was out there wasn't moving now. Just standing, waiting, listening. My mind raced. There was no reason for anyone to be out here. No one should be this far into the mountains alone at night. Except me. I gripped the knife tighter. Minutes passed, stretched into an eternity. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Then finally, soft footsteps, moving away, slow, purposeful. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then longer. I didn't sleep. At first light, I packed up as fast as I could, heart still hammering. I didn't eat, didn't stop to drink water. I just moved, faster than I had ever hiked before. I didn't care about the trail. I just needed to get back to the ridge, back to higher ground. I climbed, legs burning, lungs aching. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone following. But the trail was empty. When I finally reached the ridge, I forced myself to stop and catch my breath. The valley stretched out below, the trees still and quiet. Nothing moved. I turned and started the descent back to the trailhead. I didn't stop until I reached my car. The drive back felt unreal. The world outside my windshield too bright, too normal. I kept replaying it in my head, the sound of footsteps, the exhale right outside my tent. I still don't know who it was or what they wanted, but I know one thing for sure. I was not alone out there. I should have turned back when I saw the first warning sign. The day started early, before the sun had fully risen, with the crisp morning air biting at my skin as I tightened the straps on my pack. The plan was simple: a solo hike through a stretch of remote forest, one of those places where the trails aren't well marked and cell service is non-existent. I had studied the topographic maps, packed extra food and water, and even carried a small emergency beacon. I wasn't reckless, at least I didn't think I was. The first few miles were peaceful. Birds called from the trees, and the sound of my boots crunching against the dirt was the only other noise. I kept a steady pace, taking in the landscape, towering trees stretching toward the sky, the occasional scatter of boulders, the sunlight filtering through the canopy in golden patches. It was around midday when I noticed something was off. The path I was following became less defined, almost as if no one had walked it in a long time. That was odd, given that this trail was listed on the older maps, but I shrugged it off. I had a compass and I was confident in my ability to navigate. I pressed forward. Then I found the first warning sign. It was a tree, its trunk stripped of bark in long, jagged gouges. The exposed wood was raw and splintered. At first, I thought it could be from an animal, maybe a bear sharpening its claws, but the marks were too deep, too erratic. Something about it unsettled me, but I pushed the feeling aside. I wasn't about to turn around over something so small. An hour passed, and the forest became denser. The light filtering through the trees was dimmer now, and the air had changed. It smelled damp like rotting wood. The sound of birds had disappeared, replaced by an eerie silence. I had read before that sometimes forests go silent when predators are near. That thought put me on edge. I gripped the straps of my pack and kept moving. The trail was harder to follow now, almost non-existent, but according to my compass, I was still heading in the right direction. Then I found the second sign, a shoe, a single hiking boot partially buried in the dirt. It was old, the leather cracked, the laces missing. I stopped, staring at it. My mind worked through possibilities. Maybe someone had lost it a long time ago. Maybe an animal had carried it here. Maybe it was nothing. But the uneasy feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. I picked up my pace, determined to reach the clearing I had marked on my map. I knew that if I could just get there, I could reassess my situation, maybe even find another way back if I needed to. The trees pressed in closer. The undergrowth thickened. Then I found the third sign, pile of bones. Small, scattered, some still wrapped in scraps of dried flesh. Too big to be a rabbit, too small to be a deer. I didn't want to think about what they had belonged to. The arrangement was strange, almost deliberate, like someone had placed them there. That was when I made the decision to turn around. I wasn't too far from where I started, maybe a few hours hike back. If I moved fast, I could make it out before dark. But as I retraced my steps, something felt wrong. The path didn't look the same. I followed my compass, but the terrain was unfamiliar. Trees I didn't remember, fallen logs I hadn't stepped over before. I was lost. Panic tried to claw its way into my mind, but I forced it down. I had prepared for this. I took out my map, my compass. I took deep breaths and focused. I estimated my position based on where I had come from and adjusted my course. And then, somewhere behind me, a branch snapped. I turned so fast I nearly lost my balance. Nothing. No movement. No sound. I kept walking. Faster now. Another snap. Closer this time. I told myself it was an animal, but deep down I knew better. I had spent enough time in the woods to know what normal sounds were. This wasn't normal. I walked faster, then jogged, then ran. My breath was loud in my ears, my heartbeat hammering. The forest was closing in around me. The terrain was uneven, and my foot caught on something. Exposed roots, a loose rock, I didn't know. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my knee. My palms scraped against rough dirt and broken twigs. I didn't get up right away. I listened. Silence. Too much silence. I forced myself up, ignoring the ache in my knee. I had to keep moving. I pulled out my emergency beacon. My hands were shaking as I pressed the button, sending out a distress signal. If I couldn't find my way back, at least someone could find me. I kept moving. The forest felt endless. Then, ahead, something familiar. A tree with deep gouges in its bark. I had been walking in circles. A wave of dread washed over me. I wasn't just lost. Someone was leading me astray. I had to think. I had to stay calm. I forced myself to slow down, to focus. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows. Couldn't let night fall. I adjusted my course again, moving with more caution. And then I saw it. A figure, just for a second. A shape between the trees, motionless, watching. My blood turned to ice. I didn't wait. I ran. I didn't look back. My only thought was escape. My only goal was to put as much distance between me and whatever was out there. And then, finally, I saw something through the trees. The edge of the forest. The road. I don't remember crossing those last few steps. One moment I was surrounded by trees. The next I was stumbling onto the gravel, gasping for breath. I didn't stop moving until I reached my car. I locked the doors. My hands shook as I turned the key, the engine roaring to life. I didn't look back as I sped away. Later, when my hands had steadied, I checked my emergency beacon. No signal had ever been received. I don't know what was out there. I don't want to know. All I know is this: I will never go hiking alone again. I parked my truck at the trailhead just before sunrise, stretching my legs before hoisting my pack over my shoulders. The cold morning air stung my face, but I didn't mind. It was refreshing. The plan was simple: a 20-mile solo hike through the national forest, a loop that would take me deep into the backcountry before circling back to my truck by the next evening. I had my GPS, paper maps, extra food, water filtration, and a first aid kit. Everything I needed. I had done dozens of hikes like this before. The first few miles passed easily. The sun had risen, filtering through the trees in golden shafts of light, and the damp forest floor smelled rich and alive. Birds chirped, unseen animals rustled in the undergrowth, and my boots crunched rhythmically along the dirt path. It felt good to be alone out here, away from the noise and rush of everyday life. At around the 7-mile mark, I noticed the trail hadn't been as well maintained as I expected. Fallen branches littered the path, and in some spots, thick vegetation forced me to step carefully to avoid tripping. I checked my GPS. I was still on track. It wasn't anything to worry about. Trails get overgrown, especially in the off-season. By midday, I stopped to eat. I found a fallen log and sat down, pulling a granola bar and some jerky from my pack. The forest was quiet, unnervingly so. I realized I hadn't heard birds in a while. The usual background noise of wind through leaves and the distant calls of wildlife had faded. It wasn't silence, not entirely, but it was wrong. An absence of sound. I brushed it off, told myself I was being paranoid, and finished my food. The trail continued winding deeper into the woods, narrowing as I went. According to my map, there should have been a fork in the path leading to a small creek where I had planned to refill my water. But when I reached the spot, there was no fork, no sign of a creek, just more trees. I pulled out my GPS again, frowning. The map clearly showed the fork, but the actual trail had no split. I should have turned around then, but I didn't. I figured I had misread the map. Maybe I had to go a little farther before the split appeared. I pressed on. The terrain grew more uneven. Thick roots crisscrossed the path, and the incline steepened. I was breathing heavier now, my shirt damp with sweat despite the cool air. After another mile, I stopped to check my GPS again. It had turned off. The screen was black. I tried restarting it. Nothing. Dead battery, even though I had charged it fully before I left. I reached for my phone. No service. Not even one bar. That was expected this deep in the forest, but it still unsettled me. I took out my paper map and compass, double-checking my route. If I kept going for another 2 miles, I should intersect an old fire road. From there, I could loop back toward my original trail. I felt a little uneasy, but still convinced myself everything was fine. People get turned around in the woods all the time. That's why I had backup navigation tools. I kept walking. The forest felt different now, denser. The trees grew so close together that the sky was barely visible. The undergrowth thickened, clawing at my legs. My boots sank into the soft earth with each step. I checked my watch. Nearly 4 p.m. I needed to find that fire road soon. 30 more minutes passed. Then an hour. No road. I stopped. My breath came faster now, and my chest tightened. I had covered enough ground that I should have reached the fire road. But I hadn't. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I had veered off course slightly. Maybe I needed to go just a little farther. But I knew better. Something wasn't right. I turned around, deciding to backtrack. I would return the way I came, find the last known point on my map, and go from there. Simple. Only the trail behind me looked different. The trees weren't the same. The undergrowth seemed thicker. There was no sign of my footprints in the damp soil. I stood there, gripping my compass so tightly my fingers ached. I knew I had walked in a straight line. I knew the trail should be behind me, and yet it wasn't. Panic started creeping in. I took a deep breath and forced myself to stay calm. I had survival training. I knew what to do. I marked a tree with my knife and walked in what I thought was the correct direction. 15 minutes later, I stopped. The tree I had marked was in front of me again. I had gone in a circle. I don't know how long I stood there, heart pounding. My head felt light, my throat dry. I was lost, genuinely lost. I had read stories about people vanishing in the wilderness, about experienced hikers making one wrong turn and never being found. I told myself I wouldn't be one of them. I had supplies. I had shelter. I just needed to think. I decided to set up camp. Moving around in the dark would only get me more lost. I found a relatively flat spot beneath a thick tree, cleared away the leaves, and set up my tent. As the sun sank behind the trees, the cold crept in. I ate a little, forcing down some trail mix despite my lack of appetite. My hands trembled. The night was long. Every sound made me jerk awake. The snap of a branch, the rustling of leaves. I told myself it was animals. A deer, maybe, but it didn't feel like an animal. At some point, exhaustion took over. I woke to the pale gray light of dawn filtering through my tent. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Morning meant visibility. I could retrace my steps. But when I unzipped my tent, my stomach dropped. The forest around me wasn't the same. The terrain was different. The tree line had shifted. The spot where I had cleared leaves for my tent was now covered again, as if I had never been there. My footprints were gone. I stumbled out, my breath coming in short gasps. None of it made sense. I looked at my compass. The needle spun wildly before settling in the wrong direction. I tried to stay calm, but my mind screamed at me that something was very, very wrong. I walked all day, moving downhill in hopes of finding water. By late afternoon, I stumbled upon a creek. Relief flooded me. Where there's water, there's usually a way out. I followed it for miles, my legs aching, my vision blurring with exhaustion. Then, just as the sun began to set, I saw it. A road, an actual road. I nearly collapsed in relief. I staggered onto the pavement, looking both ways. In the distance, headlights appeared. A truck. I waved my arms frantically. The vehicle slowed, and an older man rolled down his window. "You all right?" he asked, his face creased with concern. I could barely form words. I told him I had gotten lost. He nodded, told me to get in, and drove me back to the main highway. I called for help and was taken to a ranger station. They checked my GPS when I told them it had died. The batteries weren't dead. The device worked perfectly. They looked at my map, then at me. "The area you were in, there's no fire road there. Hasn't been one for decades." I didn't know what to say. They found my truck where I had left it. They found no trace of my campsite. I don't know what happened in those woods. I don't go hiking alone anymore. I had always loved hiking alone. There was something about being deep in the woods, away from the noise of people, that made me feel more alive. I had done plenty of solo hikes before, but this one felt different, though I couldn't quite say why. Maybe it was because the trail was less traveled, or maybe it was because I hadn't told anyone exactly where I was going. It was just supposed to be a quick out and back, no more than 6 hours total. I figured I'd be back before dark. The first few miles were peaceful. The forest was thick, but sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting moving shadows on the dirt path. The smell of pine and damp earth filled the air, and every so often, I'd hear the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Birds chirped, and the occasional woodpecker knocked against a tree in the distance. Felt like any other hike. I kept a steady pace, occasionally stopping to take a drink from my water bottle or to adjust my backpack. The trail started to incline, nothing too difficult, but enough to make my legs burn slightly. I welcomed the challenge. As I moved further up, the trees thinned a bit, revealing glimpses of the valley below. It was breathtaking. I stopped to take a picture, capturing the moment to look back on later. Then, about 3 miles in, I noticed something odd. The usual sounds of the forest had gone quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. It wasn't a sudden silence, but rather a gradual fading, like the forest was holding its breath. I stopped walking, listening for anything, but all I could hear was the wind moving through the trees. A strange feeling crept over me. It wasn't fear exactly, but unease. I had read that sometimes animals sense danger before humans do, and their silence could mean a predator was nearby. A bear, maybe, or a mountain lion. I reached down to my belt, making sure my small knife was still there. Not that it would do much against a big animal, but it made me feel a little better. I considered turning back, but I was already so close to the turnaround point. I decided to keep going, moving carefully, scanning my surroundings more than before. The quiet remained, but nothing seemed out of place. No footprints, no snapped branches, no signs of a predator. Just the heavy stillness pressing down on me. About half a mile later, I came across something that made me stop in my tracks. There was a backpack lying in the middle of the trail. It looked old, faded from the sun, and partially covered in dirt and leaves. It had been there a while. I hesitated before stepping closer. The zippers were partially open, and from what I could see, it was empty. No supplies, no food wrappers, nothing. It didn't make sense. No one leaves their backpack behind in the middle of the trail, especially not one this deep into the woods. I scanned the area, looking for any signs of a person, but there was nothing, just trees and silence. A bad feeling settled in my stomach. I crouched down and touched the fabric. It was dry. I stood up quickly, suddenly feeling exposed. The smart thing would be to turn around, go back the way I came, but something about the backpack gnawed at me. If someone had left it behind, where were they, and why? I took out my phone and snapped a picture of it. If nothing else, I could report it when I got back. I kept moving, though my pace was slower now. My senses were on high alert. I checked my GPS, making sure I was still on the right path. Everything looked normal, but the feeling in my gut didn't go away. Then, about 10 minutes later, I found something worse. A jacket. Just like the backpack, it was abandoned in the middle of the trail. This time, though, it wasn't old and faded. It looked fresh, like it had been left there recently. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no torn fabric. But it didn't make sense. I stepped around it, careful not to touch it, and kept going. My mind was racing now, trying to piece things together. Then I saw the footprints. They were heading off the trail, leading into the trees. They were deep, like whoever made them had been moving fast or carrying something heavy. My heart pounded. I didn't want to follow them. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, but something about the way they disappeared into the trees made it impossible to ignore. I took a few steps closer, just to see where they led. The underbrush was thick, and after about 20 feet, the footprints faded into the forest floor. I strained my eyes, scanning between the trees. There was nothing but shadows and the feeling that something wasn't right. I turned back toward the trail, deciding I had seen enough. That's when I heard it. A sound, faint at first, then growing louder. Footsteps, but not mine, and they weren't coming from the trail. They were behind me in the trees, moving fast. I didn't think. I ran. I sprinted down the trail, my breath coming in short gasps. My pack bounced against my back, and branches whipped at my arms as I tore through the underbrush. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see who or what was behind me. After what felt like forever, I finally saw the parking lot through the trees. My car was still there. My lungs burned. My legs ached. But I didn't stop until I reached it. I threw open the door, jumped in, and locked it behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys in the ignition. I sat there for a long time, staring at the trailhead, waiting to see if anyone, or anything, came out of the woods. But nothing did. The trees stood still, silent, like nothing had happened. Eventually, I drove away, my heart still pounding. I didn't look back. I never reported what I saw. I don't know why. Maybe because I wasn't sure what I had actually seen. Maybe because I didn't want to explain why I had run without seeing anyone. Maybe because some part of me didn't want to know the answer. I haven't been hiking alone since. The sun sat low in the sky as I pulled into the trailhead parking lot. The dirt lot was empty except for my truck, the only vehicle in sight. I checked my phone, no signal. That was expected. This was deep in the backcountry, a place few people ventured, especially on a weekday evening. The plan was simple: hike 10 miles in, set up camp, and hike back out in the morning. I had packed light but smart, just enough food, water, and gear to get me through the night. I slung my pack over my shoulders, double-checked my supplies, and set off down the trail. The first few miles were peaceful. The forest around me was thick, mostly pines with some maples scattered throughout. The air was crisp, the kind that fills your lungs in a way that makes you feel more alive. The trail was narrow but well-worn, winding through the dense trees and over rolling hills. I made good time, keeping a steady pace as the sun dipped lower. After about 5 miles, I noticed the woods were getting thicker. The trees stood closer together, their branches reaching toward each other like skeletal fingers. The trail itself was less defined, covered in fallen leaves and overgrown brush. I hadn't seen a trail marker in some time, but I wasn't too worried. I had my map and compass. Still, a small unease settled in the back of my mind, quickened my pace. As darkness crept in, I found a clearing just off the trail and decided to set up camp. The spot was decent, flat ground, enough space for my tent, and a few fallen logs to sit on. I pitched my tent, rolled out my sleeping bag, and started a small fire with the dry wood I had gathered. Sitting by the fire, eating my granola bar and jerky, I let my mind wander. There was a stillness in the air that felt unnatural. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant sounds of wildlife, just silence thick and heavy, the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every little movement. I pushed the thought away. I was alone out here, and my mind was just playing tricks on me. The fire crackled, sending small sparks into the air. I poked at it with a stick, watching the embers glow. Then a sound, faint but distinct. Footsteps. I froze, my hand tightening around the stick. The sound was distant, coming from deeper in the woods. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but something about the rhythm of the steps didn't sit right. They were slow, deliberate, too heavy to be a small animal but too precise to be a deer stumbling through the brush. I turned off my headlamp and let the fire die down to embers. Sitting in the darkness, I listened. The footsteps had stopped. My pulse pounded in my ears. I strained my eyes, scanning the tree line for movement. Nothing, just shadows and the faint outline of trees against the night sky. Minutes passed. The woods remained still. I exhaled, telling myself I was just on edge. Maybe I had imagined the sound. I crawled into my tent, zipping the door shut behind me. Lying in my sleeping bag, I kept my knife close, my ears tuned for any noise. But nothing came. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I woke suddenly, Not to a sound, but to a feeling, an overwhelming sense of being watched. My skin prickled. I stayed still, barely breathing, listening for anything out of place. Then, from just outside my tent, the unmistakable sound of breathing. My blood ran cold. It was slow and heavy, inches from the thin nylon separating me from whatever or whoever was out there. I clenched my knife, my heart hammering. I didn't dare move. Then the zipper of my tent moved. Just a slight tug, enough to confirm that this wasn't my imagination. Adrenaline took over. I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on, shining it directly at the zipper. The sound stopped. My hand shook as I held the light steady, the beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing, no movement, no figure standing outside. I listened, barely breathing. The silence stretched on. Then, slowly, I heard footsteps retreating. Not running, not panicked, just a slow, steady walk back into the woods. I sat frozen for what felt like hours. Eventually, the first light of dawn seeped through the trees. I packed up in record time, not even bothering to eat. Every minute spent there felt like a mistake. The hike back was tense. Every snapped twig, every rustling leaf sent my nerves on edge. I kept checking over my shoulder, convinced I wasn't alone. When I finally reached my truck, I threw my pack in the back, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled onto the dirt road leading back to civilization, I glanced at the trailhead sign. A chill ran through me. A fresh set of boot prints led from the woods to where my truck had been parked. Whoever or whatever had been out there had followed me all the way back. I don't think I've ever been more unprepared for something in my life. When I planned this solo hiking trip, I thought I had everything figured out. I read the blogs, checked the maps, packed what I thought was enough food and gear, and even practiced some navigation skills. But nothing prepared me for what actually happened out there. I started early in the morning, right when the sun was coming up. The air was cool, and the forest smelled like damp earth and pine. It was a perfect day for a hike, or at least that's what I thought. My plan was to follow a well-marked trail up to a viewpoint and then take an old, less-traveled path down to make a loop back to my car. On paper, it seemed like a great idea. Get some solitude away from the main trail but still have a clear route back. For the first couple of hours, everything was fine. The main trail was in great condition, well-trodden with signs every so often. I took my time, stopping to take in the scenery, drink water, and adjust my pack when needed. I even saw a few other hikers, gave them a nod or a quick morning, and kept moving. When I reached the viewpoint, I felt good. The view was incredible. Rolling hills covered in endless forest, a deep valley below, and a river winding through it. I took some pictures, had a snack, and checked the map one more time before heading onto the less-used trail. That's when things started going wrong. At first, the trail was still easy to follow, just narrower and overgrown in spots. It was obvious fewer people came this way, but it was still a marked path. I walked for about 30 minutes before I noticed the markers were becoming less frequent. I wasn't too worried at first. I had my map, and I knew the general direction I needed to go. Then the trail just disappeared. I stopped and looked around, trying to see if I had missed a turn. I backtracked a bit, but there was nothing, just trees, rocks, and underbrush. The dirt path I had been following just faded into the wilderness. I pulled out my phone to check GPS, but of course, there was no signal. I had expected that, but it was still frustrating. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. This wasn't a disaster. I knew the rough direction I needed to go, and if I kept heading that way, I'd eventually reconnect with the main trail or at least reach the road. So I kept moving, stepping carefully through the brush, trying to avoid tripping on roots or twisting an ankle on loose rocks. Time passed and the terrain got harder. What had started as a simple off-trail walk turned into full-blown bushwhacking. The ground sloped downward, steeper than I expected, and before I knew it, I was sliding more than walking. Loose dirt and pine needles made it hard to keep my footing, and I had to grab onto branches and exposed roots to slow myself down. At some point, I realized I had made a huge mistake. I was deep in some ravine or washout area, surrounded by steep, uneven walls. Climbing back up wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't even sure which way I had come from anymore. Panic started creeping in, but I pushed it down. I needed to think. I pulled out my water bottle and took a long drink, trying to steady my nerves. I checked my map again, but without a clear point of reference, it wasn't much help. I decided to keep moving downhill, figuring it would eventually lead me to a stream or river, which I could follow to a road or a known location. The forest felt different down there, denser. The trees blocked out more of the light, and the air was still. No wind, no rustling leaves, just an eerie silence that made my own breathing sound too loud. I kept going, stepping carefully, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease in my gut. Then I saw it, a footprint, not mine. Someone else had been here recently. The print was clear in the dirt, fresh. Relief flooded through me. If someone had come this way, it meant there was a way out. I followed the tracks, moving as fast as I could without losing my footing. Then I noticed something strange. The footprints weren't going in one direction, they were circling. I stopped, heart pounding. Who the hell walks in circles out here? My first thought was that maybe someone else had gotten lost too. But something about the tracks didn't feel right. They were deep, like whoever made them had been standing in one place for a long time before moving again. I forced myself to keep going, following them anyway. Then they just stopped. No trail leading away, no sign of where the person had gone. Just an abrupt end to the prints, like they had vanished. I felt sick. My skin prickled, and every instinct in my body told me to leave. I turned and started walking faster, heading in what I hoped was the right direction. The silence pressed in, heavier now. I kept expecting to hear something. Footsteps behind me, the crack of a branch, anything, but there was nothing. Then I smelled it, a horrible, rancid stench, thick and rotting. It was strong, and it hit me so suddenly I gagged. It smelled like death. I didn't want to know what it was. I didn't stop to look. I just moved faster, practically running, trying to get as far from that smell as possible. I don't know how long I kept going, but eventually, I heard something, water, a stream. I stumbled toward it, desperate. When I reached it, I practically collapsed to my knees, splashing water on my face, trying to catch my breath. Then I saw the backpack. It was half buried in the dirt near the water's edge, torn open, its contents scattered. It wasn't mine. I swallowed hard and moved closer. The fabric was faded, but it hadn't been there for too long. A few feet away, I saw something else. A boot, worn down but still intact. It had dried mud on it, but no foot inside. I didn't stay to look for more. I grabbed a thick branch as a makeshift walking stick and followed the stream, walking as fast as I could. My legs were shaking, but I didn't stop. I kept moving, kept listening, kept scanning the trees for any movement. After what felt like hours, I saw the road. I nearly cried. I climbed up the embankment, stumbled onto the pavement, and just stood there, shaking. I wasn't sure where I was, but I knew I could follow the road back to where I had parked. I never looked back. I don't know what was out there. I don't want to know. But I do know one thing, I will never go hiking alone again. The trail wasn't supposed to be hard. That's what I told myself when I pulled into the parking lot that morning, tossing my backpack over my shoulder and locking my car. I had picked this hike because it was remote but not extreme, long but not technical, and it had good reviews online. People said it was beautiful, quiet, a hidden gem. That's what I wanted. Solitude, fresh air, and time away from the noise of everyday life. The first few miles were everything I had hoped for. The morning air was crisp, and the forest smelled of damp earth and pine. The trail wound through towering trees, the sunlight filtering through the canopy in patches. I saw birds flitting between the branches and even startled a deer that bounded off into the underbrush. It was peaceful, exactly what I needed. About 5 miles in, I reached a small clearing with an old wooden sign. The letters were so faded I could barely read them, but I recognized the name of the trail I was supposed to be on. There was another trail branching off to the right, narrower and overgrown. It wasn't on my map, and I didn't think much of it. I kept going. The terrain started to change. The trees grew denser, their trunks thick and gnarled. The path narrowed, and the air smelled different. Less fresh, more stagnant. The silence became noticeable, heavy. I told myself it was just the thickness of the woods absorbing sound, but it felt wrong. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my boots crunching against the dirt and my own breathing. Then I saw the first sign that something wasn't right. A shoe, just one, sitting in the middle of the trail. It was an old hiking boot, dirty and weathered. At first, I thought maybe someone lost it, but that didn't make sense. A missing shoe would be off to the side of the trail, abandoned in a rush. This was placed directly in the center, like it had been left there deliberately. I stepped around it and kept going, telling myself it was nothing. Another mile passed, and then I saw more things. A torn backpack, faded from sun exposure. A jacket shredded and tangled in the low branches. Everything was old, covered in dirt and moss, as if it had been sitting there for years. I started feeling uneasy. I hadn't seen another person the entire hike, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somewhere I shouldn't be. Then I heard something, a soft crunch of leaves, far behind me. I stopped and turned, scanning the trees. Nothing. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer, but I didn't see any movement, just stillness. I walked faster. The unease turned into full-blown dread when I found the campsite. It wasn't on the map. A single, collapsed tent sat in a small clearing just off the trail. The fabric was torn, flapping slightly in the breeze. There was a fire ring, long cold, with rusted cans and bones scattered around it. The bones looked small. Probably animal bones, I told myself, but I didn't check too closely. A deep, overwhelming sense of wrongness filled my gut. I needed to turn around. I should have turned around miles ago. I spun on my heel and started walking back the way I came, moving quickly but not running. My heart pounded in my chest. I just needed to get back to my car, get off the trail and leave. But after 20 minutes of fast walking, I saw something that stopped me cold. The shoe, the same one I had passed before, still sitting in the center of the trail. I had been walking in a straight line. My stomach dropped. There was no way I had looped back. I had been paying attention, following the trail exactly as I had come. But somehow, I was back where I had started. A sound came from the trees to my left. A rustling, quiet but deliberate. Not wind, not an animal. I started walking again, forcing myself to stay calm, but my mind was racing. I had no cell service out here, no way to check my GPS. I had checked the map before I started. This was a straightforward out and back trail. There were no loops, no confusing junctions. There was no reason I should be lost. The rustling followed me, staying just out of sight, close enough that I knew I wasn't imagining it. Then I saw another item on the trail. A water bottle. My water bottle. I had put it in the side pocket of my backpack. I reached back, fumbling blindly. It was gone. My fingers touched the empty mesh where it should have been. Someone had taken it. Someone had put it here. I started running. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. My boots pounded against the dirt. My breath came in gasps. The trail blurred around me, trees flashing past in streaks of green and brown. I just needed to get back, get to the car, get away from whatever was out here. Then I heard it. Footsteps behind me, not running, not chasing, just walking, steady, measured. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see. I just ran, forcing my legs to keep moving, lungs burning. I could see the break in the trees ahead, the parking lot just beyond. My car. Safety. The footsteps stopped. I burst into the lot, sprinting to my car, fumbling with the keys. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I turned the ignition. The engine roared to life and I peeled out of there, gravel flying. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, back in town, surrounded by buildings and people. I never reported what happened. What would I even say? I got lost for a while and someone stole my water bottle? No one would believe the fear I felt, the wrongness of that place. the way the forest swallowed sound, the way the trail led me back to the same place over and over again. I don't hike alone anymore. I set out early, before the sun had fully risen, my backpack heavy with supplies and my boots laced tight. The trail I had picked was deep in the mountains, far from the popular tourist routes, a place where few ventured. It wasn't my first solo hike, but this one felt different from the start. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the towering pines swayed slightly in the early morning breeze. The only sounds were my own breath and the rhythmic crunch of my boots against the dirt path. The first few miles were uneventful. I kept a steady pace, stopping only to sip water or adjust my pack. The landscape was beautiful, rugged cliffs rising to my left, a steep drop to my right leading down to a thick forest below. The trail snaked along the mountainside, winding through patches of dense foliage and opening into exposed rocky sections. Occasionally, I saw small animal tracks in the mud, but otherwise, I was completely alone. At around midday, I reached a clearing where I decided to take a break. I sat on a large, flat rock and pulled out a protein bar, enjoying the silence. That's when I noticed something odd. A few feet away, near the tree line, was a pile of bones. At first, I thought they were from a deer, but as I looked closer, they seemed too small, too delicate. Maybe a dog or a coyote. They had been picked clean, the white of the bones standing out against the dark soil. Something about them unsettled me. I told myself it was just nature running its course and forced myself to shake the feeling off. I continued on, the trail becoming steeper as it led up into the higher elevations. The climb was brutal, my thighs burning as I pushed forward. As I neared the top of the ridge, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. I had planned to reach a small plateau by late afternoon where I would set up camp for the night, but the ascent took longer than expected. By the time I reached the clearing, the sky had already begun to darken. I set up my tent quickly, my fingers stiff from the dropping temperature. I gathered some wood and started a small fire, the orange glow casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees. I ate a quick meal, listening to the distant sounds of the forest, leaves rustling, an occasional owl hooting. But there was something else, too. A faint noise, just beyond the fire's light. It was almost like breathing, slow and steady. I held my breath and listened, but it faded away. I told myself it was the wind and climbed into my tent, zipping the flap shut. Sleep came in restless waves. I kept waking up, heart pounding, feeling as though something was watching me. Each time, I'd sit up, hold my breath, and listen. Nothing, just the whisper of the wind through the trees. At some point, I finally fell into a deeper sleep. But then, in the dead of night, I woke suddenly, my skin cold with sweat. Something was outside my tent. Not the wind, not an animal. I could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate. They crunched on the dry leaves, circling my campsite. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I reached for my knife, gripping it so tightly my knuckles ached. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent. My breath was shallow, my body frozen. I strained my ears, listening. Then, ever so slightly, the fabric of my tent moved. Just a small shift, as if something or someone was pressing against it. Couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence stretched on, so thick it felt like a weight on my chest. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, my body rigid with fear. Finally, as dawn approached and the first light of morning crept through the fabric of my tent, I found the courage to move. I slowly unzipped the flap and peered outside. Nothing. The fire had burned out, leaving only smoldering embers. My gear was untouched, but then I saw them, footprints in the dirt. Large human footprints. They circled my tent, stopping just at the entrance. My stomach clenched. I wasn't alone out here. Someone had been watching me. I packed up as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I didn't eat, didn't stop to rest. I just moved, my pace fast, my ears straining for any sound behind me. The hike down felt endless, every rustle in the trees making my skin crawl. I knew I was being followed. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. Hours later, I finally reached my car. I threw my pack inside and locked the doors, my breath coming in gasps. As I sat there, trying to calm myself, I glanced in my rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. Just at the edge of the tree line, barely visible between the thick trunks, a figure stood watching. Not moving, just standing there. I didn't wait. I turned the key, slammed the gas, and sped down the mountain road, not daring to look back. I don't go on solo hikes anymore. I woke up before dawn, packed my bag, and drove 2 hours to the trailhead. The plan was simple: hike out to a remote lake, camp for the night, and hike back in the morning. I had done solo hikes before, but never this deep into the wilderness. The air was crisp when I stepped out of my car. The parking lot was empty, except for one other vehicle, a dusty truck that looked like it had been sitting there for a while. I checked my gear: tent, sleeping bag, food, water filter, bear spray, knife. Everything was in place. The first few miles were peaceful. Birds sang in the trees, and the morning sun filtered through the leaves, casting long shadows on the dirt path. The trail was narrow but well-marked, winding through dense forest. I made good time, moving quickly but not rushing. My boots crunched against fallen leaves, the only sound aside from the occasional rustling in the underbrush. About 5 miles in, the terrain became more rugged. The trees grew thicker, the path less defined. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The usual forest sounds, chirping birds, buzzing insects, distant rustling, faded. It wasn't complete silence, but it was close enough to make me uneasy. Then I noticed something strange: a fresh footprint on the trail ahead. It was a hiking boot print, larger than mine, but the odd thing was that it was going in the opposite direction. Whoever left it had been heading back toward the parking lot, but I hadn't seen anyone. No distant voices, no movement. It felt off. I kept going, shaking off the feeling. People hiked out here all the time. Maybe someone had come early and was already on their way back. No big deal. At around the 8-mile mark, I stopped for a break near a small creek. I sat on a fallen log, pulled out a protein bar, and checked my phone. No signal. That was expected this far out. I took my time, listening to the water trickle over the rocks. Then I noticed something else. The footprint was back, this time on the other side of the creek, and it was fresh. I scanned the woods. Nothing moved. No birds. No wind. I felt my heart pick up speed. Could have been my mind playing tricks on me, but I had this overwhelming feeling that I wasn't alone. I pushed on, faster now. The lake wasn't far, maybe 2 miles ahead. I figured I'd get there, set up camp, and shake off the paranoia. The last stretch was the hardest. The path was barely visible, just a faint indentation in the forest floor. I had to check my GPS to make sure I was still on course. When I finally reached the lake, relief washed over me. The water was still, reflecting the trees like a mirror. I found a good spot to set up camp, a small clearing with a flat patch of dirt. As the sun dipped below the treetops, I built a small fire. The light flickered against the trees, pushing back the darkness. I ate my dinner, double-checked my gear, and tried to relax. Then I heard it, a soft crunching sound. Footsteps, not an animal. Too slow, too deliberate. I turned, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. Nothing, just trees and shadows. I told myself it was nothing, but my gut disagreed. I grabbed my knife and sat with my back to a tree, facing the fire. Every few minutes, I'd hear another step, closer, then stopping, like someone was watching, waiting. I barely slept. Every little sound made my pulse spike. Sometime after midnight, I heard the soft snap of a twig, maybe 10 feet away. I gripped my knife so tight my hand ached. Then silence. I don't know how long I sat there, staring into the dark, but at some point, exhaustion won. My eyelids got heavy, and I drifted off. I woke up to gray light filtering through the trees. The fire had burned out. I sat up, groggy, my muscles stiff. Then I saw it. Footprints, circling my camp. Not mine, not animal prints. Human. I shot to my feet, my heart hammering. The prints led from the trees, circled my tent, and then disappeared back into the woods. Someone had been there, watching me, while I slept. I didn't waste time. I packed my gear fast, barely stopping to eat. My hands shook as I zipped up my bag. The hike back was a blur. Every rustling leaf, every broken branch sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I moved fast, almost running at times. I kept checking over my shoulder, but I never saw anyone. When I reached the parking lot, my car was the only one there. The truck was gone. I got in, locked the doors, and sped out of there. I don't know who was out there that night. I don't know what they wanted. But I do know one thing. I'm never hiking alone again. I parked my truck at the trailhead just as the sun started to rise. The air was crisp, cool, and carried the damp scent of pine. It was the kind of morning that made you feel alive. I checked my pack one last time: water, food, first aid kit, flashlight, knife, and extra layers. Everything was in place. The plan was simple: a solo hike up to the ridge, take in the view, and head back before dark. The first few miles were easy. The dirt path was well worn, winding through tall trees with branches that swayed slightly in the breeze. I took my time, stopping now and then to take in the quiet beauty of the forest. The only sounds were birds, the occasional rustle of a squirrel, and my boots crunching against the ground. After about an hour, the trail started to change. It narrowed, becoming steeper, the dirt giving way to loose rock. I adjusted my footing, using my trekking pole to keep my balance. The trees became denser, the light dimming as the canopy thickened overhead. I kept an eye on the markers nailed to the trees' small, weathered wooden signs with arrows pointing the way. I was deep in the forest when I noticed the first strange thing. A broken tree, not fallen from the wind or cut by a saw, but snapped clean in half, the splintered wood jagged and pale. It stood out among the others, unnatural. I stopped for a moment, taking it in. Maybe lightning had struck it. Maybe it had rotted from the inside. Either way, it put an uneasy feeling in my chest, but I pushed it aside and kept moving. The climb got harder. Sweat dripped down my back, and my legs burned with each step. I was getting close to the ridge when I found something else. An old campsite. A tent, or what was left of one, torn and collapsed. A rusted stove sat nearby, along with a few scattered cans, long emptied. It looked abandoned for years, but there was something off. The fire pit was full of wood, neatly stacked, like someone had planned to light it. Yet there were no footprints, no signs of recent activity. I knelt down, brushing my fingers against the damp wood. It hadn't rained in days, but the logs were soaked. I stood up quickly, feeling my pulse pick up. Something about this place didn't feel right. I wasn't scared yet, but I was alert. I decided to move faster, pushing past the site and continuing up the ridge. The wind had picked up now, whistling through the trees. The deeper I went, the more I noticed how quiet it had become. The birds had stopped singing. No rustling, no sounds of insects, just silence. My breath was the only thing I could hear, and it was coming faster now. Then I saw it. A boot print, fresh. The dirt was still crumbling at the edges. Someone had been here recently, and they weren't far ahead. I paused, my muscles tensed. I looked around, scanning the trees, but there was nothing. No movement. I took a deep breath and kept going. The trail was tighter here, hugging the side of the mountain with a sharp drop to my left. I didn't like how exposed I was. I kept my steps quiet, listening for anything. Footsteps, breathing, twigs snapping. But there was nothing. Then I smelled it. A stench so strong it made me gag. Like rotting meat. I covered my nose and kept moving, my stomach twisting. The wind carried it in waves, thick and suffocating. I rounded a bend, and that's when I saw them. Deer. 3 of them lying just off the trail. Their bodies were torn apart, their insides spilled onto the ground. but there were no bite marks, no signs of an animal attack. It was like something had ripped them open and left them to rot. My hands shook as I stepped back. I had seen dead animals before, but this was different. This wasn't nature. This was something else. I turned around and started back. I wasn't going to the ridge anymore. Whatever was up there, I didn't want to know. I moved fast, my heart hammering, but I kept my steps careful. I was almost past the abandoned campsite when I saw movement. A figure standing just inside the trees. I froze. The person was dressed in dark clothes, unmoving, watching. Their face was shadowed by the branches, but I could feel their eyes on me. I took a step back. The figure didn't move. Then, without a sound, they turned and disappeared into the trees. I ran. I didn't care about footing anymore. I crashed down the trail, ignoring the burning in my legs, ignoring the branches whipping at my arms. The silence of the forest was deafening. I kept checking over my shoulder, but I saw nothing. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. I threw my pack inside, started the engine, and tore out of there, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't breathe normally until I was miles away, the forest fading in my rearview mirror. I still don't know what I saw up there. Person? Maybe. But something about that place wasn't right. The campsite, the deer, the silence, felt wrong in a way I can't explain. I haven't gone back, and I never will. The plan was simple. A solo 3-day hike through the wilderness. I had done longer hikes before, but this one felt different. Maybe it was the isolation. This was the first time I'd be completely alone, miles away from any town or campsite. Just me, my backpack, and the trail. I had studied the map for weeks, planned my water sources, packed extra food, and carried enough gear to handle anything nature could throw at me. I was confident, but confidence doesn't mean safety. The first day went smoothly. The sky was a crisp blue, the air cool but not too cold. The trail started through a dense forest, and after a few hours, it opened into a valley. I moved at a steady pace, following the markers, stopping only to refill my water bottle at a small creek. By sunset, I had set up camp on a flat stretch of land near a clearing. I ate, stretched, and climbed into my sleeping bag, listening to the quiet hum of the woods around me. I slept soundly. The second day, I pushed deeper into the wilderness. The trail grew steeper, winding up through rocky terrain. The trees became sparse, replaced by jagged cliffs and loose gravel. I had to watch every step, making sure I didn't twist an ankle or slide down a sharp slope. By mid-afternoon, the wind had picked up. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, moving fast. I checked my map. There was a designated camping spot another 4 miles ahead, but I wasn't sure I'd reach it before the storm hit. Quickened my pace. By the time the rain started, I was still 2 miles away. Came down in thick sheets, instantly soaking through my jacket. The dirt trail turned to mud, and I had to slow down to keep from slipping. Thunder rumbled in the distance, getting closer with each boom. I knew I had to find cover soon. Up ahead, I spotted a cluster of trees and made my way toward them. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being fully exposed. I set up my tent as fast as I could, hands shaking from the cold and wet fabric slipping between my fingers. The wind howled, shaking the branches above me. I crawled inside, stripping off my wet clothes and wrapping myself in my sleeping bag. My heart pounded as I listened to the storm rage outside. The wind carried strange sounds, whistling, groaning, snapping branches. I told myself it was just the weather, just the wind. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to silence. The storm had passed. Everything was still unnaturally so. No wind, no rustling leaves, not even the usual chirping of insects. I checked my watch, 3:12 a.m. I shifted in my sleeping bag, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Then I heard it. A single footstep, not an animal, not the wind. A human footstep, crushing damp leaves just outside my tent. I froze. My mind raced. I was supposed to be alone. No one else should be out here. I strained my ears, waiting, Nothing, just silence. My breath felt too loud, too obvious. Slowly, carefully, I reached for my knife, gripping the handle tight. I listened for minutes, maybe longer. Then another step, closer this time. I stayed still, barely breathing. Whoever or whatever it was, they were just outside my tent. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to unzip the tent and look, but fear kept me frozen. What if they were waiting for me to make a move? Then, just as suddenly as it started, the footsteps stopped. Minutes passed. Nothing. The forest remained still. Slowly, I forced myself to breathe again, my muscles aching from tension. I stayed awake until dawn, gripping my knife, waiting. When the first light crept through the fabric of my tent, I finally unzipped the door and looked outside. Nothing. No footprints. No signs that anyone had been there. I packed up quickly, every hair on my body standing on edge. I wanted to believe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but something deep in my gut told me otherwise. I needed to move, fast. The final stretch of the hike was grueling. My legs ached. My pack felt heavier than ever, but I didn't stop. I kept checking over my shoulder, scanning the trees, listening. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I wasn't imagining it. I knew it. When I finally reached the trailhead, I felt a rush of relief, but it didn't last. As I loaded my gear into my car, I glanced back at the tree line one last time. Something was there, a figure, standing just beyond the trees, watching me. I didn't wait to get a better look. I got in my car and drove, leaving the trail and whatever was out there, far behind me. I don't know why I went out there alone. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself, or maybe I just needed to get away for a while. The stress of work, bills piling up, the endless cycle of waking up, going to work, coming home, and doing it all over again, it was grinding me down. I thought a long, solitary hike would clear my mind. So, I packed up, drove 4 hours into the mountains, and started my hike before sunrise. The trail was supposed to be difficult but not dangerous. I had done my research. It wasn't one of those places where people went missing all the time. No urban legends, no strange disappearances. Just a tough trail with stunning views. That's all I wanted. The first few hours were perfect. The air was crisp, the morning light filtering through the trees, birds calling from somewhere unseen. I felt good. It was the kind of peacefulness I hadn't felt in years. By midday, I was deep in the wilderness, far from any roads or towns. I hadn't seen another person since early that morning. I liked that. I had my backpack, my water, some food, and a map. I didn't need anything else. But as the day stretched on, something started to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious. Nothing I could put into words at first. Just a feeling like a pressure in the air, like something was waiting. The silence had changed. The birds weren't singing anymore. The wind wasn't rustling the leaves like it had before. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was just my imagination, nothing more. I kept walking, keeping an eye on the time. I had a spot picked out to set up camp before nightfall. I wasn't worried about getting lost. I had a good sense of direction, a map, and a compass. I wasn't some amateur, but as I kept going, the feeling got worse. I started to notice little things that didn't sit right with me. The trees ahead of me looked wrong. I don't know how else to say it. They were the same kind of trees I had been walking through all day, but something about them made my stomach turn. The bark was split in places like something had clawed at them. Not an animal, at least not one I had ever seen. The gouges were deep, wide apart. I stopped, ran my fingers over them. They were fresh. I told myself it was just a bear, a big one, but something in me knew that wasn't right. I had seen bear markings before. This wasn't the same. I kept going a little faster now. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, and I needed to make camp before dark. I found a relatively flat clearing and forced myself to calm down. I set up my tent, got a small fire going, and ate a protein bar. I kept telling myself I was fine, that I was just letting my imagination get the best of me. Then I heard it, A crunch. Not like a branch snapping underfoot. Something heavier. Deliberate. Close. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Then another crunch, closer this time. I turned my head slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. No wind, no birds, no insects. Just the silence pressing down on me like a weight. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. I reached for my knife. It wasn't much, just a survival knife, but holding it made me feel a little better. I stayed by the fire, forcing myself to keep my back to the tent. I wasn't gonna let whatever was out there catch me off guard. I sat there for what felt like hours, waiting, listening. Then I heard breathing. Not mine, not an animal's. It was deep, slow, steady, human. I gripped the knife tighter. My mind was screaming at me to move, to run, but I forced myself to stay still. The firelight didn't reach far into the trees, but I knew someone was out there, just beyond the light, watching me, waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, the breathing stopped. I didn't hear anything else. No footsteps, no movement, just silence. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I kept the fire going as long as I could, knife in hand, eyes scanning the trees. I told myself I would leave at first light. No hesitation. When the sun finally started to rise, I packed up my gear as fast as I could. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I moved fast, almost jogging down the trail. Every few minutes, I stopped to listen. Nothing. Maybe it had been my imagination. Maybe I had scared myself for nothing. I almost believed that until I saw the footprints. They weren't mine. They weren't from boots or hiking shoes. They were barefoot, human, large, and they followed my trail from the night before. Whoever had been out there had been following me, watching me. I ran. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs shook. I don't even know how far I went before I finally saw the parking lot. My car sitting there like a lifeline. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sat there, gasping for breath. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys in the ignition. As I pulled out, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A figure, standing at the tree line, too far to make out details, but close enough that I knew they were watching me. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I drove until I was back on the highway, surrounded by people, by normal life. I don't know who or what was out there. I don't want to know. All I know is that I won't be going back. Ever. I had been planning this hike for weeks. The trail was deep in the mountains, about 10 miles out from any town, and it promised incredible views. It wasn't one of those overly popular hikes with tons of people crowding the path, which was exactly what I wanted. Just me, the wilderness, and the silence. I got to the trailhead early in the morning, just as the sun was coming up. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of damp earth and pine. I adjusted my backpack, checked my water supply, and made sure my phone was fully charged. There wasn't much signal out here, but I had downloaded a map just in case. The first few miles were perfect. The forest was dense, but the trail was well maintained. I moved steadily, taking in the sounds of birds and the occasional rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Every so often, I'd stop to take a sip of water and admire the scenery. The sun filtered through the leaves, creating shifting patterns of light on the ground. It was exactly what I had hoped for. About 5 miles in, the trail started to change. The trees grew thicker, the path narrower. The signs marking the trail became less frequent, and I noticed that the dirt under my boots was looser, less packed down. It felt like fewer people had come this way. Then I saw something that made me pause. A boot print, but it wasn't fresh. It had been rained on at some point, and the edges had crumbled slightly. Still, it was recent enough that it hadn't completely disappeared. I crouched down, looking at it more closely. It was larger than my own boot print, but the shape was strange, almost warped, as if whoever left it had been dragging their feet. I shook it off and kept moving, telling myself it was nothing. People hiked out here all the time. Maybe it was just an old print from someone who had come through before the last rain. Still, I found myself looking over my shoulder more often. Around mile 7, the trail all but disappeared. I checked my map, but it showed I was still on the right path. The dirt was softer here, almost like no one had walked on it in years. I hesitated, considering whether I should turn back, but I was so close to my goal, an overlook with a view of the entire valley. I decided to push on. That's when I smelled it. A sharp, metallic scent that didn't belong in the woods. It reminded me of rust, but heavier. The air felt thick, almost oppressive. I slowed my pace, scanning the area around me. The trees were unusually still, and the usual sounds of the forest had faded. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. Then I saw it. Pile of bones. Not scattered, not left behind by a predator. They were stacked, organized. I couldn't tell what kind of animal they had belonged to, but they were clean, stripped of any flesh. Some were cracked, as if something had sucked the marrow out. My stomach clenched, and an icy wave of fear crawled up my spine. I wanted to turn around. I should have turned around, but something in me needed to know more. I took a careful step closer, scanning the ground for any sign of what had done this. That's when I noticed the second pile, and the third. They weren't just animal bones. Some were too long, too straight. Human. My body locked up. My breath came fast, shallow. My brain screamed at me to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood there, staring, as if I was waiting for my mind to process what I was seeing. Then I heard it, a branch snapping, close. I turned so fast I almost lost my balance. The trees were thick, making it hard to see more than a few feet in any direction. My pulse pounded in my ears. I couldn't see anything, but I knew someone was there. I backed away, stepping carefully. The urge to run was overwhelming, but I knew better. Running meant noise. Noise meant attention. I needed to get out of there quietly. Another sound, this time closer, the faint crunch of leaves. I moved faster, forcing myself to keep steady, to keep my breathing controlled. Every step felt like an eternity. My legs were stiff, my muscles burning with tension. I kept my eyes on the ground ahead of me, making sure not to trip. If I fell, I was dead. I didn't know how, but I knew. Then I heard something I'll never forget. Breathing. It was shallow, ragged. Not my own. And it was close. I didn't look back. Couldn't. My body went cold with pure animal fear, and my legs finally listened. I ran. I didn't care about the noise anymore. I didn't care if whatever was behind me could hear me. I just ran. The trail was barely visible, but I didn't stop. Branches whipped my arms, my face, but I didn't stop. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop. The sun was lower now, shadows stretching long across the forest floor. The trail blurred beneath me as I sprinted, leaping over roots, dodging rocks. My only goal was getting back to my car. Then I saw something that made my stomach drop. A second trail, one that hadn't been there when I started. It was narrow, winding off to the side, and it looked used. The dirt was disturbed, the undergrowth flattened. Someone had been walking here. Recently, I didn't stop to think. I kept running, sticking to the path I knew. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the pain in my chest, ignoring the burn in my legs. My car was close. I could make it. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the feeling was gone. The air felt lighter. The forest sounded normal again. I could hear birds, hear the wind through the leaves. I didn't slow down until I saw my car. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped them. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and locked it. I sat there, gasping for breath, my heart slamming against my ribs. My hands were slick with sweat. I forced myself to look up, to scan the tree line. Nothing, just trees. Just the same peaceful forest I had walked into hours ago. But I knew what I had seen, what I had heard, and I knew, without a doubt, that I had not been alone. I drove away too fast, my tires kicking up gravel. I didn't stop until I was miles down the road, back in civilization, surrounded by streetlights and the sound of cars. Only then did I let myself breathe. I don't know what I walked into that day. I don't want to know. But I do know one thing: I will never go back. I had been hiking alone for years. It wasn't about proving anything or chasing some thrill. I just liked the quiet, the way the world shrank down to my breath, my footsteps, the rustle of leaves. It was simple, peaceful. I planned my trips carefully, carried what I needed, and always let someone know where I was going. This time was no different. I had picked a remote trail in Montana, deep in the mountains. It was less traveled, which I liked. No tourists, no noise, just me and the wilderness. The forecast was clear, my gear was packed right, and I had enough food for 4 days. The hike in was uneventful, long stretches of dense pine, the occasional glimpse of a deer darting through the underbrush, the steady crunch of dirt under my boots. I made good time and set up camp near a narrow creek. It was perfect. The first night was calm. I built a small fire, cooked a meal, and stared up at the stars until my eyes got heavy. The kind of night that makes you feel small in a good way. I woke up once when a branch snapped nearby, but it was probably just a deer or some other animal. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The second day, I hiked farther up the ridge, pushing deeper into the backcountry. The trail was rougher, less defined. The kind where you have to watch for markers on trees to know you're still going the right way. I didn't see another person all day. I liked it that way. That night, though, something felt off. I had set up my tent in a small clearing, surrounded by thick trees. It should have felt safe, but I couldn't shake this strange feeling, like something was watching me. It didn't make sense. I was used to being alone out here. I knew what normal loneliness felt like, and this wasn't it. I sat by the fire longer than usual, scanning the trees, listening. Nothing. Just the wind moving through the branches. I finally crawled into my tent, but sleep wouldn't come. Every noise outside made me tense up. The wind, the creak of trees shifting, the occasional snap of a twig. I told myself it was all normal. It was, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound that wasn't normal. A slow, deliberate step just outside my tent. Not an animal too heavy. I held my breath, listening. Another step. Closer. I reached for my knife, my fingers tight around the handle. The fire had died down, leaving the campsite in near darkness. I could just make out the shape of someone, standing at the edge of the trees. No flashlight, no gear, just standing there. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The figure stood there for what felt like forever. Then, slowly, it stepped back into the trees and disappeared. I stayed awake until dawn, knife in hand, heart pounding in my chest. When the light finally came, I packed up fast. I had planned to stay another 2 days, but I wasn't stupid. If someone was out here watching me, I wasn't sticking around to find out why. The hike back was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my own footsteps. Every few minutes, I stopped and listened. I didn't see anyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking. I tossed my pack inside and locked the doors before I even sat down. My gut was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. I started the engine and didn't look back. I don't know who was out there that night. Maybe it was just some other hiker, someone lost, someone curious. But my gut tells me otherwise. I've been hiking for years, and I've never felt like that before. I still go out alone, but I carry a gun now, and I never camp in the same place twice. I don't know why I didn't turn back earlier. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was pride. But looking back, I can see exactly when I should have stopped. The trail started out normal enough. It was supposed to be a weekend hike, 2 days in, 1 day out. I had picked a remote trail in the mountains, one that didn't get a lot of traffic. I wanted solitude. No distractions, no people, just me and the wild. I had done my research, packed carefully, and made sure I had everything I needed. A tent, sleeping bag, extra layers, food, water, a map, a compass, a GPS. Everything was in order. The first day went fine. I hiked deep into the woods. the only sounds coming from the crunch of my boots on the dirt and the distant calls of birds. It was peaceful. The air was crisp, the sun was warm, and the trees swayed gently in the wind. I reached a good spot to set up camp by a small stream. I built a fire, ate my dinner, and fell asleep under a sky full of stars. The second day, things started feeling off. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just little things. I kept feeling like I was being watched. Every so often, I would stop walking, turning around quickly to catch whoever or whatever was there. But there was nothing, just trees and silence. The feeling didn't go away. Then there were the footprints. At first, I thought they were mine. But when I stopped to really look, I noticed something was wrong. They weren't quite right. The steps were too close together, like someone was walking with small, shuffling steps. And they weren't as deep as mine, meaning whoever left them was lighter than me. But I had seen no one else. I had heard no one else. I kept walking, trying to ignore it. The deeper I went, the worse it got. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just silence, thick and heavy, pressed against me, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. I checked my GPS. It said I was on the right track, but something felt wrong. The trail ahead looked less traveled, almost untouched. I hesitated, but I kept going. I had planned this trip down to the last detail. I wasn't about to turn back now. Then I found the first sign that something was seriously wrong. A backpack, just sitting there in the middle of the trail, like someone had dropped it and walked away. It was old, the fabric torn and weathered. I walked closer, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Inside, I found a jacket, a rusted knife, an empty water bottle, and a small notebook. The pages were damp and covered in smeared ink. I could barely read what was written, but one word stood out clearly on the last page. Leave. That was when I should have turned around. That was the moment, but I didn't. I told myself the bag had been there for years, that the person who left it was long gone, that there was nothing to worry about. I shoved the notebook back inside, left the bag where I found it, and kept moving. The trail got harder. The trees grew closer together, their twisted branches reaching out like fingers. The air felt heavier, thicker. I was sweating despite the cool temperature. My breathing was too loud. Every step felt wrong, like I was walking into something I wasn't supposed to see. Then I smelled it. A deep, rancid stench like something rotting. Came in waves, sometimes strong, sometimes faint, but it was always there. I scanned the trees, looking for a dead animal, a carcass, anything. But I saw nothing, just trees, endless trees. I pressed on, forcing myself forward. But then I saw it, a second backpack. This one was newer, less weathered. It looked like it had been dropped recently. A few feet away, there was a shoe, just one. No footprints, no sign of struggle, just an abandoned pack and a lone shoe. I stood there, staring at it, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. I pulled out my GPS again, double-checked my map. I was still on the trail, but something was wrong. Something was really, really wrong. I turned around. I wasn't going any farther. I moved fast, walking quickly but carefully. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, pressing against me like a weight. Every so often, I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. The silence was suffocating. Then the sound came, a soft rustling. Not the wind, not an animal. It was deliberate, slow, close. I froze, gripping my knife, scanning the trees. I couldn't see anything, but I knew it was there. Something was there. I started walking again, faster this time. My heart was hammering. The rustling followed me. I didn't run, couldn't. Running in the woods is how people get hurt, how they get lost. I kept my pace steady, my breathing controlled, my eyes forward. The rustling stopped. For a moment, everything was silent again. Then I heard footsteps, not mine. I broke into a jog, my pack bouncing against my back. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the trail. I needed to get out. I needed to get out now. The footsteps grew louder, closer. They weren't running. They weren't panicked. They were slow, measured. following me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see. The next hour was a blur. I don't remember much, just the blind panic, the sweat dripping down my face, my legs burning as I pushed myself faster, farther. The trail finally opened up, and I saw the parking lot. My car. My hands were shaking so badly that I struggled with the keys. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and sat there, gasping for air, staring into the trees. Nothing. There was nothing there. I drove away, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't stop until I was miles away. I don't know what was out there. I don't know who or what was following me. But I do know one thing. I won't ever go back. I started my hike early in the morning, just as the sun was rising over the treetops. The air was cool, crisp, and filled with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. My boots crunched over the narrow dirt trail as I made my way deeper into the wilderness. The plan was simple. Follow the marked trail up the ridge, take in the views at the summit, then loop back down before nightfall. It was a long hike, but nothing I hadn't done before. I had always loved hiking alone. There was something about the solitude, the quietness of the forest, the rhythmic sound of my breathing as I moved forward. The trail was well marked, with bright orange blazes nailed to the trees every 100 feet or so. I felt confident. The map in my backpack was more of a precaution than a necessity. The first few hours passed uneventfully. The forest was alive with the rustling of small animals in the undergrowth, the occasional bird call, and the distant rush of a stream. I stopped at a clearing to eat a granola bar and drink some water. Looking at my map, I saw I was making good progress. I figured I had another hour before I reached the first major landmark, a small wooden bridge crossing a fast-moving creek. When I reached the bridge, something felt off. The creek below was louder than I expected, almost deafening. The wooden planks were damp and slick with moss, and the handrails looked weathered. As I stepped onto the bridge, I hesitated. The boards groaned under my weight, but they held firm. I crossed quickly, not wanting to linger. Once on the other side, I shook off the uneasy feeling and pressed on. As I climbed higher, the forest changed. The trees grew denser, and the underbrush thickened. The air became cooler. The wind picked up, rattling the branches overhead. I checked my watch, still plenty of daylight left. But something gnawed at me, the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stopped to listen. Just the wind, just the rustling of leaves, just the normal sounds of the woods. I shook my head and kept moving. I told myself it was just my imagination. But then I noticed something odd. The trail was becoming harder to follow. The bright orange blazes that had been so easy to spot were suddenly less frequent. I found one, then walked for what felt like too long before finding the next. Had I missed a turn? I pulled out my map and compass, trying to orient myself. The terrain looked right, but something still felt wrong. I pressed on, hoping the trail would become clearer soon. Then I saw the boot prints. At first, I was relieved. Someone else had been here recently. But then I looked closer. The prints were deep, like someone had been running, and they weren't going in a straight line. They veered off the trail, circled back, then disappeared into the trees. I stood there for a long moment, my breath slow and steady. My first thought was that someone had gotten lost and wandered off trail. But the longer I stared at the prints, the more they unsettled me. They didn't look like the movements of someone lost. They looked erratic, like someone had been moving quickly, like they had been looking for something, or avoiding something. I moved on, faster now, my senses heightened. Every sound felt sharper. Every movement in the corner of my eye made my heart pound. I told myself it was just nerves, that there was nothing out here but trees and rocks and animals. But then I saw something else. A piece of fabric caught on a branch, faded blue, torn at the edges. I hesitated before reaching out and touching it. The fabric was damp. It had been here for a while. I looked around, scanning the forest for any sign of who it might have belonged to. Nothing, just trees and shadows. I kept moving. My pace quickened. My breathing was controlled but deeper now. The trail was harder to follow. The blazes had stopped appearing altogether. I had to rely on my compass and the general shape of the land to keep moving in the right direction. Then I heard it, a sharp, snapping sound, like a branch breaking, not far behind me. I turned quickly, my heart hammering. Nothing, just trees. I stayed still, listening. The wind had died down. The forest was too quiet, the kind of silence that made my skin prickle. Then another sound, footsteps, light, careful. I wasn't alone. I forced myself to keep moving, but my steps were deliberate now. I wanted to get back to the main trail. My compass told me I was still heading in the right direction, but the land sloped in a way that made it hard to judge. I kept glancing over my shoulder. I never saw anything, but I felt something. Presence, watching, waiting. Then, ahead of me, I saw movement, a figure, distant, just past the trees, standing still. I froze, couldn't make out details, just the outline, person, standing completely still. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to call out, but something in me told me not to. Every instinct screamed at me to be quiet. The figure didn't move. I took a slow step back. Then another. Still, the figure didn't move. Then, in an instant, it was gone. 1 second there. The next, nothing but trees. I turned and ran. I didn't think. I just ran. My boots pounded against the uneven ground. Branches whipped against my face. I wasn't careful. I just needed to get away. After what felt like an eternity, I burst onto the main trail. The orange blazes reappeared, bright against the trees. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. I kept moving, pushing forward, my mind racing. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if something or someone was behind me. When I finally reached my car, I threw myself inside and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The woods behind me looked peaceful, deceptive. I never reported what I saw. I told myself it was nothing, that my mind had played tricks on me, that the silence, the prints, the figure, none of it was real. But I never went back. I should have known better. I've hiked enough trails to understand when something isn't right. But that day, I ignored the warning signs. The trail was in the middle of nowhere, deep in the national forest. It wasn't one of the well-maintained paths with clear markers and occasional rest spots. It was an old trail I found on a map, marked only by a thin, dotted line. No recent reviews online, no photos, just a name, Dry Creek Trail. The name was misleading. The map showed a winding stream running alongside most of the path, cutting through the hills. It looked challenging but doable. I wanted to test something more than a casual weekend hike. I packed enough food and water for a full day, double-checked my gear, and made sure my emergency beacon was charged. I was prepared, or so I thought. I parked at a dusty pull-off near the start of the trail. There was no official parking lot, no signs, just a gap in the trees where a faint footpath disappeared into the undergrowth. The forest was dense, the kind where sunlight barely touched the ground. It was eerily quiet. No birds, no wind, just the occasional creak of a tree shifting. The first few miles were uneventful. The trail was narrow but clear, winding between tall pines and patches of thick underbrush. The stream was there just like the map showed. It was small, barely more than a trickle in some spots, but I could hear it gurgling beside me as I walked. The sound was comforting. Then things started to change. The further I went, the less the trail seemed like a trail. The dirt path became uneven, scattered with loose rocks and tangled roots. It looked like no one had been through in years. I hesitated but kept going. I told myself that some trails were just less traveled, that maybe the map was old. Still, the silence felt heavier. The stream, which had been a constant companion, had started to fade in and out, disappearing underground and reappearing in strange places. At one point, I came across something that made my stomach drop, a rusted metal sign, half buried in the ground. The paint was chipped away, but I could still make out the words. Unsafe area, trail closed. There was no date, no details, just those words. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal, no surprise there. I stood there for a while, debating. I could turn back, take the safe route, but I had already come so far. The map showed the trail looping back toward my car in just a few more miles. If I turned back now, I'd be hiking the same distance anyway. I made the choice to press on. It didn't take long before I started feeling like I had made a mistake. The trail became steeper, the ground softer. Every step sank into damp earth, the smell of rotting leaves thick in the air. My boots squelched with each movement. The trees closed in tighter, their twisted branches making it feel like I was walking through a tunnel. Then I noticed the footprints. They were fresh. At first, I felt relief, proof that someone else had been through here recently. But the more I looked, the less sense they made. The prints were deep, like whoever left them was carrying something heavy. And they weren't just heading in one direction. They crisscrossed, doubled back, circled. Something about them felt wrong. I kept moving, but I felt it then, that creeping, prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I wasn't alone. Every sound became sharper. The rustling leaves, the snap of a branch. My own breathing felt too loud. I stopped and listened. Nothing. But the silence wasn't the same as before. It wasn't empty, it was waiting. I walked faster. The ground sloped downward, and I nearly lost my footing on the slick mud. The air smelled different, metallic, damp. Then I saw it. The stream had pooled into a large, stagnant puddle in the middle of the trail. The water was dark, almost black, but that wasn't what stopped me. On the far side of the water, half submerged in the mud, was a backpack. A heavy-duty hiking pack, the kind meant for long treks. The straps were torn, the fabric stained. It had been there for a while, but not long enough to be covered completely. I could still see the brand logo, still make out the shape of a rolled-up sleeping bag strapped to the bottom. I stood there, frozen. My mind went through a dozen scenarios. Someone lost it. Someone left it. Someone didn't come back for it. I wanted to check inside. Maybe there was ID, a name, a clue, but my gut screamed at me to keep moving. My instincts, the same ones I had ignored earlier, were now clawing at me to leave. I stepped around the water, avoiding the pack. I didn't look back. The trail became a mess of broken branches and fallen trees, like something had torn through the area. My pace quickened. I could feel the weight of the air pressing down on me. The sky had darkened, not from the sun setting, but from thick, rolling clouds. A storm was coming. I pushed forward, my legs aching, my breath ragged. I needed to get back. Then I saw it, something ahead, past the trees. A structure, an old hunting cabin, barely standing. The roof sagged, the wood blackened with age. The door was missing, the interior swallowed in shadows. And beside it, more footprints. I didn't stop. I didn't investigate. I moved past it as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I could feel eyes on me, but I saw no one. Then, ahead, finally, blessedly, I saw the gap in the trees, the end of the trail. I ran. I burst out of the woods and into the clearing where my car was parked. My hands fumbled for my keys, barely able to hold on to them. I got inside, locked the doors, and turned the engine over. As I pulled onto the road, I glanced back. There was no one there, no movement, no shapes in the trees, just the empty trail and the whisper of the wind. I drove without stopping, without looking back again. I didn't check my phone until I was miles away. When I did, I searched for any information on Dry Creek Trail. Nothing. No official record of it ever existing. I don't know what happened out there, but I know one thing for certain: I'll never go back. I had always liked hiking alone. There was something about the silence of the woods, the feeling of being away from everything, that made me feel at ease. It wasn't about the adventure for me. It was about the quiet, the solitude. No phones ringing, no traffic, no small talk. Just the wind in the trees and my own footsteps crunching on dirt and leaves. That's why, On a cool October morning, I decided to take a trail I hadn't been on before. It was about an hour outside of town, a place not many people went. I found it while scrolling through a local hiking forum, an unmarked path in a national forest, barely used. People said it was overgrown, rough in some spots, but worth it. A hidden gem. That's what they called it. A hidden gem. I parked my truck at the small pull-off near the tree line, double-checked my pack, and set off. The first part of the trail was easy to follow, winding through tall pines with thick undergrowth on either side. The smell of damp earth and pine needles filled the air. Birds chirped in the distance. Everything felt still, peaceful. After about half a mile, the trail narrowed, and the brush got thicker. It was obvious not many people came this way. The path twisted uphill, and I had to duck under low-hanging branches, pushing aside thorny bushes. My boots sank into soft, damp soil in some places, and in others the dirt was packed hard. I could tell the trail hadn't been maintained in years, but I liked that. It made it feel untouched, wild. An hour in, I stopped to take a drink from my water bottle. The woods were even quieter now. No wind, no birds, just silence. It didn't feel eerie, not yet, just different. Like I had walked into a part of the forest that didn't get many visitors. A place that wasn't used to people. I kept moving, pushing deeper into the trees. The air felt heavier the farther I went. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like the forest itself had a weight to it. Like the trees were leaning in, pressing close. I wiped sweat from my forehead and took another sip of water. My GPS showed that I had gone about 3 miles in. If I followed the loop, I'd be back at my truck in another 2 hours. Easy. That's when I saw it. A boot print in the dirt. It was fresh. Not mine. Someone else had been here. Not long ago either. The edges of the print were still crisp, not softened by wind or rain. But something was off. The print was deep, deeper than mine, like whoever made it had been carrying something heavy. And the way it faced, straight off the trail into the trees, bothered me. Who leaves a trail like that? I glanced around, suddenly feeling exposed. I hadn't seen a single person since I got here. No other cars at the pull-off. No voices. No signs of life. But someone had been here. Recently. I shook it off and kept walking. The farther I went, the more the trail faded. The dirt path became a tangle of roots and rocks. My GPS said I was still on the right track, but it didn't feel like it. The trees grew denser, their trunks thick and dark, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out the sky. It was too quiet. No wind, no rustling leaves, just my breathing, my footsteps. Then I heard it. A snap, a branch breaking, close. I froze, listening. Nothing. My pulse picked up. Probably a deer, I told myself, or a raccoon. But I didn't move. I waited. Then another snap. Closer. I turned, scanning the trees. Shadows stretched between the trunks, long and dark. My eyes darted from one to the next, looking for movement. Nothing. Just trees. Just the forest. I told myself to keep moving. Whatever it was, it wasn't my problem. Animals lived here. I was the visitor. I picked up my pace, pushing through the underbrush, branches scraping my arms. My heart was beating too fast now, my skin prickling with sweat. I just needed to get back to my truck. That was all. Just finish the loop. Then I saw another footprint, bigger this time, deeper, and then another, and another, leading off the trail. I swallowed hard. Whoever it was, they weren't following the path. They were cutting through the woods, moving fast. That's when I smelled it. A sharp, sour stench, like sweat and dirt, like something old, unwashed. The smell of someone who had been living out here for too long. My stomach twisted. I forced myself to keep walking, faster now, almost jogging. The trees blurred past me. My breath came in short gasps. I kept my eyes on the ground, on the trail, watching for more prints. Then I heard it again. Not a branch snapping this time. Something else. A breath. Right behind me. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing. Just trees. Just silence. But I knew I wasn't alone. I turned back and ran. My pack bounced against my shoulders. My boots slammed against the dirt. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just needed to get out. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping against my face, my arms. The smell grew stronger, clinging to the air, burning my nose. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I saw it, the break in the trees, the small parking pull-off where my truck was waiting. Relief flooded me. I stumbled forward, reaching for my keys in my pocket, my fingers shaking. I threw the door open, climbed in, and locked it. My hands trembled as I shoved the key into the ignition, started the engine. Then, just as I was about to drive away, I looked up and saw him, a man standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. His clothes were torn, his skin dark with dirt. He didn't move, just stood there, staring. I didn't wait. I slammed the gas, peeling out onto the road, my tires kicking up gravel. I didn't stop, not until I was miles away, back in town, surrounded by people, by noise, by everything that wasn't that forest. I never went back, never looked up the trail again. But sometimes, when I'm alone, when the world is quiet, I think about that man, the footprints, the smell, the way he stood there just watching, and I wonder how long he had been following me. I don't usually hike alone. It's not that I'm afraid of the woods or getting lost. I just prefer the company. But that weekend, my plans with friends had fallen through, and I had already packed my gear. It felt like a waste to cancel everything, so I decided to go by myself. The trail wasn't far, just a couple of hours' drive from home, and I had hiked it before. Nothing extreme, just a quiet, wooded path leading to a ridge with a great view. I got to the trailhead just before noon. The parking lot was mostly empty, aside from an old sedan and a dusty pickup. I didn't see anyone around, but that wasn't unusual. It was early spring, and the weather was just starting to warm up. Most people wouldn't bother hiking until summer. I locked my car, slung my pack over my shoulders, and set off. The first few miles were peaceful. The forest was quiet except for the occasional chirp of a bird or rustling in the underbrush. The ground was still damp from the last rain, and the air smelled like wet earth. I kept a steady pace, enjoying the solitude. It felt good to be out, away from everything. No emails, no phone calls, just the trail and me. After about an hour, I reached a fork in the trail. To the left was the main path, the one most hikers took. It was well maintained, winding gently up toward the ridge. To the right was an older, narrower trail. It had been closed off a few years ago due to erosion, but I had taken it once before. It was steeper, but it cut nearly an hour off the hike. I hesitated, then took the old trail. I figured if it got too rough, I could always turn back. The path was less defined than I remembered. Overgrown in some places, washed out in others. I had to watch my step, but I liked the challenge. It felt more like an adventure this way. The trees were denser, the light dimmer. I hadn't seen any other hikers yet, and it was starting to feel like I had the whole forest to myself. Then I noticed something strange. About 50 yards ahead, just off the trail, there was a backpack. It was wedged between some rocks, half buried under fallen leaves. It didn't look like it had been there long. The colors weren't faded, and the fabric wasn't torn. It was just sitting there, abandoned. I stepped closer, scanning the area. No sign of anyone. No sound, no movement. I crouched down and gave the bag a light tug. It was heavy, still full of gear. That was odd. Most people wouldn't leave their pack behind unless something was seriously wrong. I unzipped the main compartment and peered inside. Clothes, food, a first aid kit. Everything looked untouched. There was even a full water bottle. No ID, no name. A bad feeling crept up my spine. Someone had left this here, recently. But where were they? I stood and scanned the trees. Still nothing. I listened carefully, but the forest was silent. Too silent. The usual sounds, birds, insects, distant rustling, were gone. Just the wind through the branches. I told myself it was fine. Maybe someone had just ditched their bag for some reason. Maybe they were coming back for it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to keep moving. The ridge wasn't far now, and I didn't want to linger. As I walked, I kept looking over my shoulder. I wasn't scared exactly, just uneasy. The trail got steeper. Loose dirt slid under my boots, forcing me to slow down. I focused on my footing one step at a time. After about 15 minutes, the trees thinned, and I reached the top. The view was just as I remembered. Rolling hills stretching for miles, a river snaking through the valley below. Normally, I would have taken my time, soaked it in, but my mind was still on that backpack. And then I saw something else. Near the edge of the ridge, just past the tree line, was a tent. It was an older model, faded green, pitched in a small clearing. At first, I felt relieved. Maybe the owner of the pack was here. Maybe they were just off exploring. But as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The tent was zipped shut, but it looked collapsed, like something heavy had pressed down on it. A few feet away, there was a fire ring, half-burnt wood and cold ashes. No fresh footprints, no sign of life. I hesitated, then called out, "Hello!" No answer. I swallowed hard, my pulse picking up. I wasn't sure what to do. If someone was in trouble, I couldn't just walk away. But every instinct in me was screaming to leave. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and crouched next to the tent. Slowly, I reached out and unzipped the entrance. Inside was a mess. A sleeping bag partially unrolled. Flashlight, dead. Crumpled food wrappers, and something else. A knife, a hunting knife, lying in the dirt. Stained dark, I shot to my feet, my heart hammering. This was bad, really bad. Someone had been here, and something had happened. Then I heard it, a twig snapping. Close, too close. I spun around, scanning the trees. Nothing, but I wasn't alone. Someone was watching. I didn't wait to find out who. I turned and bolted, running faster than I ever had in my life. My pack bounced against my back. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop. I crashed through the underbrush, half blind with panic. The trail blurred beneath me. I wasn't even thinking, just moving. Get to the car. Get out. Get away. After what felt like forever, I burst into the parking lot. My car was still there. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, and practically threw myself inside. I locked the doors, started the engine, and peeled out of there without looking back. I don't know what happened in that tent. I don't know who left that pack or who was watching me. But I do know one thing. I'll never hike alone again. I had been planning this solo hiking trip for months. The idea was simple. Drive out to a remote trail in the mountains, camp for a night or two, and hike back. It was the kind of trip I had done before, though never quite this far off the beaten path. I wanted solitude, the kind that only comes when you're deep in nature, where there's no cell service, no traffic, no people. Just me and the trail. The drive took nearly 5 hours. The last hour was nothing but a narrow dirt road winding through dense forest, the kind where trees grow so close together it feels like a tunnel. I had to slow down for potholes and fallen branches, and more than once I wondered if my car was built for this kind of terrain. When I finally reached the small clearing where the trailhead began, there wasn't another car in sight. Perfect. I pulled my pack from the trunk, double-checked my gear, and locked the car. There was a map posted at the trailhead, faded and weathered from the elements. It showed the loop I had planned, a long, gradual ascent through the forest, leading to a ridge where I'd camp for the night before descending the next morning. The whole loop was about 20 miles, with my campsite positioned around the halfway point. The air was cool, crisp with the scent of pine. I adjusted my pack and started walking. The first few miles were uneventful. The trail was well maintained but clearly not used often. I passed through dense forest, the kind where the sunlight barely reaches the ground, and then into stretches of open meadow where the sky felt impossibly wide. The climb was gradual, steady. I focused on the rhythm of my steps, the weight of my pack, the distant sound of birds and rustling leaves. Somewhere around mile 6, the forest changed. The trees grew taller, thicker, their trunks covered in moss. The undergrowth thinned, leaving only a bed of fallen needles and decaying leaves. It was quieter here, no birdsong, just the occasional creak of branches shifting in the wind. I glanced at my map. I was still on track, maybe a little ahead of schedule. I kept moving. After another hour, I reached a small stream. It wasn't marked on my map, but that wasn't unusual. Minor waterways shift all the time. I knelt, refilled my water bottle, and drank. The water was cold enough to make my teeth ache. As I stood, I noticed something strange. Footprints. They were faint but unmistakable. The muddy bank held the imprint of a boot, roughly the same size as mine. But there was something off about them. The depth of the print suggested someone carrying a heavy load, but the stride was irregular, uneven, like whoever left them was limping. I scanned the trees. No one. It was probably nothing. A hunter, maybe, or another hiker who had passed through earlier. But something about the prints unsettled me. I pressed on. The trail steepened, winding up the ridge. By the time I reached the top, my legs burned. I found a small clearing with a decent view of the valley below and decided to set up camp. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the temperature dropped fast. I built a small fire, cooked a quick meal, and sat back against a log, watching the flames. The forest felt different at night. The silence was heavier. Then I heard it, a branch snapping. I froze. It wasn't the small, random sound of settling wood. It was deliberate. Weight on a branch, something or someone moving in the dark. I reached for my flashlight and swept it across the trees. Nothing. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer, but I kept my knife close as I crawled into my tent. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept waking up, certain I'd heard something. Footsteps, rustling, breathing. But every time I unzipped the tent and shined my light into the woods, there was nothing. At some point, exhaustion won. I woke to the first light of dawn, stiff and sore. The fire had burned down to embers. I packed up quickly, eager to be moving again. The descent was supposed to be easier, but my legs were fatigued. The air felt heavier. The silence from the night hadn't lifted. Then I saw them. More footprints, fresh, and not mine. They were alongside my trail, close enough that someone could have watched me pass. I picked up my pace. An hour later, I found something that stopped me cold. A piece of cloth torn and caught on a low branch. Dark brown, almost black. I touched it. Damp. Not from water. From something else. I stuffed it in my pocket and kept moving. The rest of the hike was a blur. Every instinct screamed at me to hurry. My breath came faster, my steps more uneven. I kept glancing back, convinced I'd see someone behind me. I never did. When I reached the trailhead, my car was just as I left it. No signs of anyone else. I threw my pack into the trunk and got in. The engine roared to life, breaking the silence. As I pulled onto the dirt road, I glanced at my rearview mirror. The trees stood still, the trail empty, but the feeling remained. Someone had been out there, watching, following, and whoever they were, they hadn't wanted to be seen. I started my hike before sunrise. The forecast was clear, the air was crisp, and I had packed everything I needed. My pack was heavier than I liked, but I had extra water and food just in case. The trail was deep in the mountains, a quiet place that not many people visited. That was exactly what I wanted, a long solo hike with no distractions. The first few hours were peaceful. Birds chirped, and the sound of the wind moving through the trees was calming. The trail was rough in some spots, with loose rocks and steep inclines, but nothing I couldn't handle. I had been hiking for years and knew how to pace myself. I took short breaks, sipped water, and kept moving. As I got deeper into the wilderness, the trail became less defined. I checked my GPS and map often, making sure I stayed on course. There were no marked signs, just a faint path that others had walked before me. The trees grew thicker, blocking out more of the sun, but the temperature stayed warm enough. Around noon, I stopped to eat. I sat on a fallen log, took off my pack, and stretched. My legs ached a little, but that was normal. I finished my sandwich, drank some water, and got moving again. That's when I noticed something strange. The woods were silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing. I shrugged it off. Sometimes animals go quiet when they sense something unfamiliar. I kept walking. The path became harder to see, but I followed my GPS. It told me I was on track, but the terrain looked different from what I expected. Then I saw something odd. A set of footprints in the dirt. They weren't mine. They were fresh. Someone else had walked this trail recently. That shouldn't have been a big deal, but I hadn't seen anyone all day. The prints were deep, like the person had been carrying a heavy load. I kept moving a little faster now. The quiet was starting to feel oppressive. I had an uneasy feeling, like I was being watched. I told myself it was just paranoia. Long hikes can mess with your head, especially when you're alone. An hour later, I found something even stranger. A torn piece of fabric caught on a tree branch. It was dark, maybe from a jacket or backpack. I stopped and looked around. The footprints kept going ahead of me. I debated turning back. Something felt off, but I had already come so far. If I turned around now, I would have to hike several hours back to my car. If I kept going, I'd reach a campsite where I could rest overnight. I decided to push forward. The trail narrowed and the trees closed in, making it feel like I was walking through a tunnel. The footprints continued, but now they looked hurried, like whoever made them had been running. My heart pounded. Was someone else lost out here? Injured? Then I smelled it. A sharp, metallic scent. Blood. I stopped. My body tensed. The smell wasn't strong, but it was there, carried by the wind. I scanned the area, but I didn't see anything. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe an animal had been injured. Maybe a hunter had passed through. I took a few cautious steps forward. Then I saw something in the dirt. A backpack half buried under leaves. It looked old, weathered by the elements, but not ancient. I walked up to it slowly, every nerve in my body on high alert. I nudged it with my boot. The zipper was broken, the fabric torn. Inside, I saw a water bottle, a map, and a flashlight with dead batteries. Nothing else. No ID, no phone. Nothing that told me who it belonged to. I took a deep breath. My gut was screaming at me now. Something was wrong. I checked my GPS. The signal flickered, then went out completely. No service. I decided to turn back. I walked fast, my eyes scanning the trees. Every sound made my heart jump. The woods were still eerily silent, except for my footsteps. Then I heard something else. Footsteps. Behind me. I froze. The sound stopped too. I turned around, but there was nothing. Just trees and shadows. I started walking again. A little faster. Then I heard it again, closer. Someone was following me. Panic surged through me. I wasn't armed, just a pocket knife in my pack. If someone was out here watching me, I was vulnerable. I picked up my pace, almost jogging now. My breathing was heavy, but I didn't stop. I needed to get back to the main trail, back to my car. Then I saw it. Another backpack, lying in the dirt. This one was newer. The straps were clean, the fabric still bright. A jacket was draped over it, and next to it, a shoe. My blood went cold. I didn't stop to look. I ran, full sprint. My pack bounced against my back. Branches scratched my arms, but I didn't care. I needed to get out. The trail was harder to follow at this speed, but I kept going. Then I heard something that nearly made me collapse. Breathing, right behind me. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my legs. The trees started to thin. I was getting closer to the main trail, just a little further. Then, in the distance, I saw movement. A figure. I almost screamed, but then I realized it was a hiker, an older man walking with trekking poles. I ran straight toward him, gasping for breath. He looked startled. "Are you okay?" he asked. I didn't answer. I turned around. The trail behind me was empty. No footprints, no movement, just trees. I wanted to tell the man what happened, but I couldn't get the words out. I just nodded and kept walking. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors and sat there, shaking. I didn't look back at the trail. I just started the engine and drove away. I don't know what I saw out there. I don't know who was following me, or if they were still out there, waiting for the next person to come along. But I do know one thing. I'm never hiking alone again. I was never the type to get spooked easily. I had been hiking for years, exploring remote trails alone, often going miles without seeing another soul. It was something I loved. Getting away from the noise, the endless distractions, just me and the quiet of the wilderness. That was supposed to be the plan this time, too. A solo overnight hike in a place I'd never been before, deep in a national forest far from any town. But something about this trip didn't sit right from the start. I had picked the location randomly, just scanned a map, found a secluded spot, and packed up. I had everything I needed: a tent, food, water, a GPS, and a satellite phone in case of emergencies. The trail was long and mostly unmarked, which was fine by me. I liked the challenge. I arrived early in the morning, parked at a small dirt lot, and started walking. The first few miles were easy, a wide path cutting through thick woods. Birds were chirping, the sun was high, and everything felt normal. But as I got deeper in, the air seemed different. The trees grew closer together, their branches reaching across the trail like they were trying to block it. The sounds of the forest faded, not completely, but enough that I noticed. I told myself it was just the way sound worked in dense woods, but the silence was unsettling. After about 4 hours, I reached the spot I had picked to camp. It was a small clearing near a creek, surrounded by tall pines. I set up my tent, ate a quick meal, and stretched out to rest before exploring a bit more before dark. I still had a few hours of daylight, and I wanted to check out a nearby ridge I had seen on the map. So, I grabbed my day pack, marked my campsite on my GPS, and headed out. The terrain got rougher as I climbed. The ground was rocky, covered in thick roots that twisted and stuck out like they wanted to trip me. As I moved higher, I noticed something strange. There was no sign that anyone had been here before. No old fire pits, no discarded trash, not even a footprint. That was rare even in remote areas. People had been everywhere. But here, it was like I was the first. I reached the top of the ridge and stopped to take in the view. The sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows across the forest. It should have been beautiful, but something about it felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not just a passing paranoia, the deep, gut-wrenching certainty that someone or something was staring at me. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, looking for movement. Nothing, just the same silent woods. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. I told myself I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. I started heading back down, but I felt rushed now, like I needed to get back before dark. The trail seemed different going down, like the trees had shifted when I wasn't looking. My gut told me to move faster, so I did. By the time I made it back to my campsite, the sun was almost gone. I built a small fire and tried to shake the uneasy feeling that had followed me down the ridge. I forced myself to eat, to drink some water, to focus on normal things. But as the fire crackled and the night closed in around me, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. The silence was too deep. The air was too still. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then I heard it. A sound, faint but distinct. A crunching noise, like footsteps moving through the underbrush. Not fast, slow, deliberate. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. My fire wasn't big enough to light up much of the surrounding trees, but I could see just enough to know there was nothing in sight. Still, the sound continued. Closer. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the noise. Nothing, just trees and darkness. But the second I turned the light off, the sound started again. Closer this time. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. I called out, not because I expected an answer, but because I needed to hear something, anything besides that slow, creeping movement. Silence. I waited. The fire crackled. A single pine cone dropped somewhere in the distance. Then, just when I started to think I had imagined it, the sound came again. right at the edge of the firelight. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back to my tent, my knife in my hand, staring into the dark. The sound never came into view. It stayed just beyond what I could see, circling, waiting. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I didn't waste time. I packed my gear as fast as I could and started back toward my car. I moved quickly, checking behind me every few steps. The feeling of being watched never left. The hike back was longer than it should have been. It felt like the trail had stretched overnight, like the trees had shifted. I pushed on, my legs burning, my breath ragged. The whole time, I felt it. Something just beyond my vision, matching my pace, hidden in the trees. When I finally saw the parking lot, I almost ran. My car was the only one there, just as I had left it. I threw my pack into the trunk, got in, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I didn't look back as I drove away. I didn't check the rearview mirror. I just drove, putting as much distance between me and that place as I could. I still don't know what was out there. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But I know this. I've hiked a lot of places, spent a lot of nights alone in the woods, and I've never felt anything like that before. And I never want to feel it again. I had planned the hike for weeks. The route was supposed to be a challenging but rewarding trail deep in the mountains, far from any towns or roads. I wanted to push myself, to spend time away from the noise of everyday life and just be alone with nature. I had done solo hikes before, but nothing this remote. I packed everything carefully. Extra food, a tent, a satellite phone, even though I didn't expect to use it, and my usual gear. The weather was supposed to be perfect for the weekend, clear skies, cool temperatures, nothing extreme. Everything seemed right. I parked my car at the trailhead in the early morning, checked my gear one last time, and set off. The first few hours were perfect. Birds chirping, a light breeze in the trees, the smell of damp earth. The incline was steady, but nothing I couldn't handle. I felt strong, confident. As the day went on, the trail became rougher. I had to climb over fallen logs and navigate through thick brush. The deeper I went, the less maintained the trail was. That was expected. This was one of those hikes that only serious backpackers did. By late afternoon, I had covered about 10 miles, and I was feeling it in my legs. I decided to set up camp near a small stream. The sound of the water was calming, and there was a flat area just big enough for my tent. I ate my dinner, filtered some water, and sat for a while, enjoying the peace. The stars came out, and I felt completely alone in the best way. No sounds except nature, no distractions. Just me and the wild. I crawled into my sleeping bag, feeling good. But sometime in the night, I woke up. It was dead silent. Not a single insect, no wind, no rustling trees. Just silence. That's what made me uneasy. The forest is never truly silent at night. I listened for a while, trying to hear something, anything. Then, in the distance, there was a faint snapping sound, like a branch breaking. Not close, but not far enough to ignore. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer. It had to be. I forced myself to relax and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I packed up and continued my hike. I tried to shake off the unease from the night before, but something about the silence still bothered me. I kept moving, covering another 8 miles before deciding to set up camp again. That night, I woke up again. This time, there was a sound. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, coming from the direction I had hiked from. I held my breath and listened. The steps would come, then stop for a long moment, then start again. It wasn't an animal. Animals don't move like that. I reached for my knife, gripping it tightly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't move. I just waited. Then, after what felt like forever, the steps faded away. I didn't sleep after that. At first light, I packed up faster than I ever had before. I wanted to get out. I wasn't even thinking about finishing the trail anymore. I just wanted to get back to my car. The hike back was brutal. I was moving fast, not pacing myself, just trying to get out as quickly as possible. Every sound made me jump. The forest felt different, less peaceful, like something was watching me. By the time I got close to the trailhead, my body was exhausted, but I kept pushing. Then, as I rounded a bend, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. Not mine. Not boot prints. Bare feet. And they were fresh. They led off the trail into the trees. I didn't stop. I didn't even look around. I just ran the last mile to my car, threw my pack in, and locked the doors the second I got inside. I sat there for a while, catching my breath, my hands shaking. The trail was remote. No other cars had been parked when I arrived. I hadn't seen a single person for 2 days. So who the hell was out there, barefoot, in the middle of the mountains? I didn't stay to find out. I started my car and left, not stopping until I was miles away. I don't go on solo hikes anymore. Not after that. Whatever was out there, it wasn't an animal. And I don't ever want to find out who it was. I should have known better. The plan was simple, just a 3-day solo hike through a well-marked trail. Nothing extreme, nothing reckless. But the wilderness doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't care about your experience, your preparation, or your confidence. It swallows you whole if you let your guard down. The first day started fine. I parked my truck at the designated lot, checked my pack one last time, and started down the trail. The air was crisp, the scent of pine thick in the air. Birds chirped, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint sound of a stream. Everything felt peaceful. I moved at a steady pace, my boots crunching over fallen leaves and twigs. The trail wasn't difficult, just a steady incline, winding through tall trees that occasionally opened up to breathtaking views of the valley below. I made good time and reached my planned campsite before sunset. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and cooked a quick meal on my small stove. As the fire crackled, I stared up at the sky. The stars were unbelievably bright, free from the pollution of city lights. I felt at peace, alone but not lonely. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. I slept well that night, the cool air keeping me wrapped in my sleeping bag. The second day was when things started feeling off. The morning was uneventful. I ate a quick breakfast, packed up my gear, and continued along the trail. The plan was to reach a small lake by midday, rest for a bit, then push on to the next campsite. The hike was tougher than the previous day, more uphill climbs, more loose rocks to navigate. By noon, my legs burned and sweat trickled down my back, but I never reached the lake. Somewhere along the way, I must have missed a marker. The trail should have been clear, but the deeper I went, the less familiar it felt. I didn't realize I was lost right away. I kept walking, convinced I'd find the right path again. But the deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees grew thicker. The air was still, unnervingly silent. The birds had stopped chirping. Even the wind had died down. The only sound was my own breathing and the crunch of my boots on the ground. I checked my map and compass. Something wasn't right. The direction I thought I was going didn't match what the compass said. I felt a cold sweat form on my skin. I told myself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help. I just needed to retrace my steps. But the thing about getting lost is that you never realize when it happens. By the time you do, you've already made too many wrong turns. I backtracked, or at least I thought I did. The trees all looked the same, the ground uneven and covered in thick roots. I checked my phone, no service, which I expected. I had an emergency GPS, but when I turned it on, it struggled to find a signal. I kept walking, forcing myself to stay logical. Then I found the footprints. At first, I felt relief. If there were footprints, it meant someone else had been here. But as I looked closer, my relief faded. They were my footprints. I had been walking in circles. That was when the fear started to creep in. Real fear, the kind that grips your chest and makes your mouth dry. I had read about this. When people get lost, their minds play tricks on them. The best thing to do is stop moving, stay put, and let search teams find you. I forced myself to set up camp early. I was frustrated, but I had enough supplies to last a few days. I just needed to rest, think clearly, and figure out a plan. That night, the woods felt different. I kept hearing noises. Not animals. Animals move with purpose. These were random, scattered sounds. A twig snapping, leaves crunching, the kind of sounds that made you wonder if you were really alone. I barely slept. By the third day, I was exhausted. My water supply was running low, and I had no idea which direction to go. I tried using the sun as a guide, but the forest canopy was too thick. I decided to move again, hoping to find higher ground. Then I found the cabin. It was old, weathered, barely standing. No road leading to it, no signs of life. Just a small wooden structure in the middle of nowhere. I hesitated. Something about it felt wrong, but I needed help. Maybe there was an old map inside, supplies, anything. The door was slightly open. I stepped inside. Dust covered everything. The furniture was minimal, a small table, a chair, a rusted stove. A pile of old blankets in the corner. No electricity, no modern appliances. It looked abandoned, but there were signs someone had been there not long ago. An empty food can sat on the table. A dirty plate. Then I noticed the smell. Rot. Something was dead. I looked around, trying to find the source. My stomach turned as I followed the scent to a corner of the room. There, underneath a pile of rags, was a backpack. It wasn't mine. I reached down, my hands shaking as I pulled the rags away. The backpack was torn, stained. And then I saw it, the remnants of a boot, the bone of a foot still inside. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short gasps. Whoever had been here before me never made it out. A sound outside. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I froze. The door was still open. The woods outside thick and unmoving. The sound of my own heartbeat filled my ears. I didn't wait. I grabbed my pack and bolted. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran.
Branches tore at my arms, my legs.
My lungs burned, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Hours passed before I finally collapsed. I had no idea where I was, but I didn't care. The sun was beginning to set. My entire body ached, my throat raw from breathing so hard. Then voices, real voices. I forced myself up, stumbling toward the sound. And then, through the trees, I saw them. Hikers, a group of them. They saw me, this wild, dirt-covered, terrified mess of a person, and rushed over. I could barely speak, but they understood enough. They had a satellite phone. They called for help. Took hours for the rescue team to reach us. They asked me questions, but I had no answers. I didn't mention the cabin. I just wanted to leave. I never found out whose backpack that was. I never found the cabin again, even when I looked at maps of the area later. Maybe I imagined some of it. Maybe I didn't. But I do know one thing. I'm never hiking alone again.